Hey guys, welcome back to the Red Bed. Today I've lined up over 3 hours of real-life Reddit stories to keep you company, whether you're winding down for the night or just need something playing in the background. And while you listen, I'll be sharing some hardcore gameplay I got today where I get more progress done on my base, and also visit my friend's base for the first time, which I'll be sharing his gameplay of him building it later in the vid too. Also, I try to post these videos daily, so whenever you need something to relax or fall asleep to, feel free to come back to the channel. But anyways, let's get into the video. This first story is about someone who set up a porch camera to catch a package thief neighbor, only to discover they were way off when the real culprit showed up. For a few weeks straight, I noticed a pattern that started small and then stopped being ignorable. Packages kept disappearing from my porch. First a paperback I'd been excited to read, then a couple of kitchen gadgets that should have been sitting on the doormat, tucked behind the planter the drivers use. By the third disappearance, my brain had already picked a suspect. My neighbor is outside a lot. He smokes on the steps, fusses with a jungle of mismatched plants, and chats with whoever passes by. We never really clicked, so I quietly labeled him Nosy. And once I did, every missing box felt like a dot, connecting to his name. I found myself peeking through the blinds, narrating a whole mystery where he was the porch pirate, and my front walk was the scene of the crime. I didn't want to confront him without proof. I'm not great at confrontation, and the last thing I wanted was to be loudly wrong. So I did the modern thing and turned an old phone into a porch cam. I taped it inside the window, set motion alerts, and aimed it at the mat and the little square of concrete where deliveries land. I did a quick test, opened the door, waved, closed it, just to be sure it caught the essentials. The next delivery was due that afternoon: coffee pods and a new spatula. Not glamorous, but exactly the kind of box that had been vanishing. I worked at my desk with one ear tuned to the door. When the notification pinged, I let a few minutes pass and then opened the app to watch the clip, ready to finally confirm my suspicion. And my jaw dropped. It wasn't my neighbor. A scruffy, medium-sized dog trotted up the path like it paid the mortgage. Ears perked, tail wagging at a steady tempo. It sniffed the cardboard, nudged an edge, and then, with careful precision, clamped onto a corner. The whole package tipped, scraped over the lip of the mat, and the dog, like a tiny forklift with paws, backed up, adjusted, and hauled it away, trotting off with prize-in-mouth confidence. I replayed the video twice. All that suspicion, and the thief was a determined four-legged collector with excellent teeth. Relief mixed with embarrassment. I'd cast my neighbor as the villain in a story that starred a fuzzy opportunist. Once I knew what I was looking for, I noticed clues I'd missed. Scuffs on the step paint, a torn corner from an old padded envelope near the hedge. I called animal control, reported a friendly stray with a talent for transportation, and sent them the clip when they asked. 2 days later, they called back, amused. They'd found the dog and, more importantly, the stash, tucked in a forgotten side yard behind our building. Long grass, leaning fence, sat a neat little hoard. My paperbacks, my spatula, the coffee pods, even a pack of microfiber cloths. Everything was dusty, a little dog-haired, but still sealed. The pup hadn't shredded anything. It had curated. Standing there while the officer cataloged boxes, I felt that warm rush of secondhand embarrassment. I'd spent weeks side-eyeing my neighbor, and all along, this shaggy archivist had been the real culprit. The officer scanned for a chip, none, and told me they'd place the dog with a rescue partner and keep me posted. Guilt does a specific thing in the chest. It makes your heart heavy and your feet move. The next morning I baked a batch of cookies and knocked on my neighbor's door. I told him the entire saga, from the missing book to the porch cam to the canine reveal. I braced for annoyance or an I knew it shrug. He burst out laughing. Full body, doorframe leaning laughter with tears. "It was a dog?" he gasped. "A dog stole your coffee pods?" "Apparently a very organized dog," I said, holding out the cookies like a peace treaty. Just like that, the tension dissolved. We went from polite nods to running jokes. He started texting me when a box arrived. I sent him the clip, and he showed it to a couple of the building regulars. For a week straight, anyone I passed on the stairs asked, "Any new canine deliveries?" We kept a bowl of water near the steps because the dog still wandered by with the rescue team sometimes, tail swishing like a metronome set to cheerful. Animal control followed up a few days later. The pup had no chip but plenty of charm. and the rescue listed it as healthy, friendly, and motivated by caring things. My neighbor bought a small bag of dog food just in case and started keeping a treat or two handy. When he sees the dog on a training walk, he asks the handler if he can offer one. Every time he glances at me and jokes, "Guard your mail." Looking back, the funniest part isn't even the stash. It's the story I wrote in my head before I knew the truth. I decided who the villain was and then only noticed what confirmed it. The smoking on the steps, the constant presence, the fact that we weren't friends. The camera didn't just catch a dog, it caught me, building a case from assumptions and background noise. Now, when a delivery is due, I still peek at the live view out of habit, but I do it with a smile. My neighbor and I chat more easily. He'll ask what I ordered and then predict whether the collections department would approve. And that scruffy thief? Last I heard, the rescue taught it a new trick for adoption events, carrying a tiny canvas mailbag around the play yard. Somehow that feels exactly right. That's where this story finishes. That twist lands perfectly. Classic porch mystery solved by one very proud pup. I like how suspicion turned into a shared joke and a better neighbor relationship. It's a light reminder that our brains love suspects, but the truth sometimes has wagging ears and a collector's mindset. The image of that little mailbag gets me every time. This next story is about someone who managed to ruin a couple's date night in the most awkward way possible, all because of one clumsy moment. Last night, I decided to grab some takeout after a really long day. I was drained, both physically and mentally, and honestly not paying much attention to anything around me. Earlier in the evening, I had been playing Counter-Strike with a group of friends for hours, so my brain was still kind of stuck in that foggy, zoned-out mode you get when you've been staring at a screen too long. By the time I picked up my food and started heading out of the restaurant, I was on autopilot. I had the bag in my hands, the smell of General Tso's chicken drifting up, and I was already imagining collapsing at home with the food in front of me. But as I stepped toward the door, my body decided to betray me. Somehow, my feet caught on absolutely nothing. No cracks, no uneven tile, no stray bag on the floor. I just forgot how to walk for a second. I stumbled forward, lost my balance, and before I could even process what was happening, the bag flew out of my hands. Time seemed to slow down as I watched it arc through the air, land squarely on the table beside me, and spill directly onto a couple in the middle of their dinner date. The girl gasped loudly, pushing her chair back in shock. The guy immediately whipped his head around and gave me the kind of glare that could burn a hole straight through your skull. My heart dropped into my stomach. I stood there frozen, feeling like the world's biggest clown, with my entire order now scattered across their table, their food, and, worst of all, their clothes. I snapped out of it and rushed to apologize. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I must have said it 100 times in the span of a minute. I grabbed napkins, scrambled to help them clean up, but the truth was, once hot sauce and noodles are all over someone's shirt, there's not much you can do. I kept handing them napkins like that would magically undo the disaster, but it only made me feel more useless. The couple just stared at me. The girl looked stunned, like she couldn't believe this had actually happened, and the guy kept giving me that look, the one that said I had just single-handedly ruined their night. Every second felt longer than the last. The restaurant staff, thankfully, were kind about it. They stepped in quickly, helped the couple get settled, and even offered to remake my order. They were understanding, probably because they've seen enough weird things happen in restaurants to know accidents do occur. Still, my face was burning with embarrassment. I didn't even want the food anymore. I just wanted to crawl under a rock, vanish, and pretend none of this had ever happened. As I finally left, clutching my new bag of takeout, the only thing running through my mind was how badly I must have ruined that couple's evening. They'd probably been looking forward to a nice date night, and instead they ended up covered in my spilled dinner. Looking back, I don't even know how I tripped. My body just decided to betray me at the exact worst moment. All I know is from now on, when I'm exhausted, maybe I shouldn't be trusted to carry food at all. That story wraps up here. That's one of those painfully awkward accidents you replay in your head for days. The way the guy just stared must have made it 10 times worse. Honestly though, everyone's had a clumsy moment like that. It just usually doesn't involve soaking strangers in chicken sauce. It's a story that's equal parts embarrassing and hilarious. This next story is about someone in tech support who held onto a grudge for years, and finally got the perfect chance to deliver a slow, satisfying payback. When I first started out in tech support, I was only a few months into the job. I worked the phones for a PC company, helping customers troubleshoot, log tickets, and deal with issues as quickly as possible. Most calls were straightforward: reset passwords, fix hardware glitches, walk people through software errors. Then came the one that stuck with me for years. One day, I got a call from an American internet provider. The rep on the line wasn't a customer, but another employee calling on behalf of one of their customers. She told me that her customer had supposedly won 6 months of free internet service with us. That immediately caught my attention because I'd never heard of such a promotion. I asked her how the customer had won. She explained that the customer had simply clicked on a picture on their site and it revealed the prize. That sounded suspicious right away. I asked if I could see this picture, or at least be directed to it, but she shut me down immediately. No, you have to be one of our customers to see it. So now I had a problem. I couldn't confirm the promotion, I couldn't see the picture, and I had no idea if this was even legitimate. Meanwhile, the call was running long and dragging down my performance stats. I flagged my team lead, explained what I knew, and was told to gather whatever info I could, log the issue, and follow up. That's how I first got introduced to Sarah. She was a contact in sales from another office in another country. I called her, left voicemails, and kept trying to track down answers. The thing about me is that I like closure. I don't like leaving problems half-finished. But Sarah, she couldn't have cared less. When I finally reached her, she brushed me off like I was wasting her time. She gave half answers, avoided the questions, and sighed like my persistence was annoying. She even said she'd get to it eventually. Meanwhile, I was stuck with an open ticket, a confused customer, and no resolution. Eventually, I escalated the problem up the chain. Management stepped in and decided to just honor the prize directly, bypassing whatever mess the sales team had set up. The customer got their free internet, even though they never knew how sloppy it had been handled. It wasn't the cleanest solution, but it kept the customer happy. As for me, I never got any closure from Sarah. She ignored my calls, didn't follow through, and left me hanging. I let it go on the surface, but inside, I remembered. Now fast forward 5 years. I'd been promoted a couple of times by then, moving into a role with more responsibility. One evening I picked up an internal call from a number I recognized. Another building, another country, and there it was again. Sarah. I didn't let on right away. She asked for specs on a particular machine, something she needed for sales. Her tone hadn't changed. Short, impatient, like she was too busy for pleasantries. I asked her a few questions, confirmed what she was looking for, and pulled up the files. But the system was running slow that night, and I couldn't get the details right away. She started to huff. I could hear her impatience growing through the headset. "Why aren't you telling me what I need yet?" she snapped. I explained calmly that the system was sluggish, and I was waiting on the files to load. She groaned, clearly frustrated. I asked if she'd managed to access them on her end. "No, I haven't," she barked back. "Okay," I said evenly. "Well, I'm experiencing the same thing." "Can't you do something about it?" she demanded. "I'll notify the right group after our call," I assured her. But she wasn't satisfied. She wanted the answer now. That's when I decided the moment had come. "This is Sarah, right? Sarah from sales in location?" There was a pause. Yes," she muttered, like she wasn't sure why I was asking. "You probably don't remember me," I said, letting my voice stay calm. "But my extension has changed since I last called you. About 5 years ago. I called you about a customer from an online American company. They won a prize. 6 months free internet. Ring any bells?" The line went hollow, dead silent. I could almost hear her swallow on the other end. "I never did get a return call about that," I continued. "Never really knew what happened to Mrs. So-and-so and her prize. Crickets. Not a word from her." Finally, the files loaded. I pulled up the specs and gave her the information she wanted. "Yes, they'll be able to add one of those," I said. Then I paused, just long enough to let the moment sink in. "Sorry it took me so long to pull that up. It felt like 5 years, just to tell you that. That was the sweet taste of closure I'd been waiting for." That story wraps up here. That's such a perfect slow burn kind of revenge. The patience it takes to wait 5 years and then deliver the line like that is impressive. What makes it even better is how subtle it was. Not loud or dramatic. just quiet and cutting. Sometimes timing really does make the payoff. This next story is about a new manager who tried to enforce strict working hours across international teams, only to be shut down by Swiss labor laws and HR. Early last year, we got a brand new manager in our department. He had previously been running another IT group in Germany, but transferred to Switzerland to take charge of our team. Our department wasn't all in one place. We had people spread across Switzerland, Spain, and Mexico. The second line team was based in Spain and Mexico, while the third line was split between Switzerland and Spain. It was an international mix that, while sometimes tricky, had worked well enough for years. At first, the new manager took his time. He didn't dive straight into sweeping changes. Instead, he made small adjustments here and there. Extra reporting requirements, more frequent updates, and an increased meeting cadence. Suddenly, we were logging how long tickets took us, sending out weekly project updates, and holding department-wide meetings every 2 weeks instead of once a month. Honestly, these changes were minor annoyances at worst. Sure, it was more bureaucracy, but nothing we couldn't live with. But then, about 6 months in, he rolled out a change that ruffled feathers across the entire department. See, even though Switzerland and Spain are technically in the same time zone, the way people structure their workdays is very different. In Switzerland, employees start work between 7 o'clock and 8:30 in the morning. Lunch is early too, usually from 11:30 to 12:30. And by late afternoon, most people are winding down and heading out between 3:30 and 5:30. In Spain, on the other hand, things run later. Workdays often don't start until after 9 o'clock. Lunch doesn't happen until 1 o'clock or even later. And people are often still online until 6 o'clock. Because of that, the overlap between Switzerland and Spain typically fell into 2 windows, between 9 o'clock and 11:30 in the morning, and 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That gave us about 4.5 hours of solid overlap each day to run meetings, collaborate, and catch each other online. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. The new manager didn't like that. He figured that if he aligned everyone's working hours, we could boost our daily overlap by another 2 hours. After looking at people's calendars, he decided that the best solution was to enforce an 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock working day across the board. That way, we'd all be online together for longer stretches, and in his mind, productivity would naturally increase. When he announced this, the reaction was not great. Even people whose current schedules already matched that time frame were frustrated. They weren't necessarily personally impacted, but they were annoyed on behalf of teammates who would be. For those used to early starts, or those who had childcare obligations, this change wasn't just inconvenient. It would actively disrupt their lives. When asked why this was being forced through, the manager simply repeated that it was about increasing overlap. People pushed back. One colleague pointed out that with his 30-minute lunch break, this schedule meant he'd actually end up going over his contracted hours each week. The manager brushed it off and said he'd look into it. Another asked if HR had been consulted. The manager confidently replied, "No, I don't need to run this by HR." Then someone else asked if we'd need to start recording our hours. Again, the manager said no. This had nothing to do with hours logging. That was his mistake. In Switzerland, labor laws are very strict about working time. By law, employees need to record their hours, and employers must keep those records to ensure compliance. There are exceptions, though. At smaller companies, they can simply record the total daily hours. Senior employees can sometimes sign waivers, exempting them from logging hours, provided they meet a salary threshold and can exercise autonomy in how they structure their time. That's exactly the situation we had in Switzerland. Every engineer in our office had signed that waiver. The deal was straightforward. We worked our contracted hours, but we decided when and how to distribute them. Some weeks might demand 50 hours, while others only needed 30. Some days stretched to 11 hours, followed by a short 5-hour day later in the week. We didn't log our time, and we didn't explicitly report our schedules. But the trust was there. We made up the difference when workloads demanded it, and the system worked smoothly. But the waiver had one very important condition. Our employer could fix up to half of our working hours. The rest had to be ours to determine. With a 40-hour contract, they could fix 20 hours, and we'd get freedom over the other 20. Courts in Switzerland had clarified this definition, and here was our manager trying to fix 100% of our hours. That immediately invalidated our waivers. It meant that if someone reported us to the labor authorities, our company could be hit with fines, potentially lose the right to use working time waivers altogether, and face enormous complications in scheduling. Without those waivers, engineers wouldn't be able to flexibly work nights or weekends for maintenance, patching, or emergencies. The whole department's efficiency would collapse. The senior colleague who had raised the HR question saw the opening. He went straight to HR and explained the issue. HR didn't hesitate. They took it straight up the chain to the manager's director. That same day, the policy was put on hold. By the end of the week, we had another meeting. This time, the manager came in with a very different tone. He admitted he hadn't properly researched Swiss labor laws and apologized for the oversight. Then he unveiled a new, supposedly compliant system. In Spain, the 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock schedule would remain, but in Switzerland, only 50% of our hours would be fixed, 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The idea was that we'd still overlap with Spain at the start and end of the day, but we'd retain flexibility for the rest. Was it legal? Technically. Was it practical? Not really. Looking at my calendar for Monday, I had one meeting at 11 o'clock and another at 3 o'clock. That meant I'd log on early, log off mid-morning, then log back in for the afternoon. It was clunky and made the day feel fragmented. But then Monday came. At 6 o'clock, I logged in and noticed two teammates were already online from home. We greeted each other and compared plans. Our idea was to work straight through until 10 o'clock, log off, come back for the 11 o'clock meeting, then take a long lunch until 1:30. After that, we'd finish off the day and log out at 5 o'clock sharp. Meanwhile, two others came into the office at 7 o'clock. They had their own plan. Work a bit in the morning, then take a 2-hour lunch break in the city, enjoying the early afternoon sunshine. By 11:30, the rest of the Swiss team had heard about it. One guy had an appointment later that evening, so he stuck to the fixed schedule. Another was working from home and wanted to finish early, but two of our colleagues, who had more free time, simply left at lunchtime. They spent their afternoon sailing around Lake Zurich before returning to the office just before 3 o'clock, logging the rest of their hours at home after 5 o'clock. By Tuesday, the whole fixed hours experiment was dead. Both Switzerland and Spain went back to flexible scheduling, and a few months later, that manager was gone. That's where the story ends. That one felt pretty satisfying. It's funny how a manager thought he was tightening control, but ended up getting schooled by the law. The contrast between his rigid plan and the team enjoying a boat ride on Lake Zurich makes it even better. Sometimes a system only works because of trust, and when someone tries to mess with that, it falls apart fast. This next story is about a father-in-law who threw a drunk low blow, and the son-in-law who found a clever way to get even months later. Back in December of 2021, I was spending the holidays with my wife's family. For the most part, I've always gotten along really well with my father-in-law. We share a lot of hobbies, we hang out often, and he knows how to take a joke. That's why this whole thing ended up being more funny than anything, even though it definitely started with a painful moment. That night, everyone in the family was drinking pretty heavily. I, on the other hand, stayed sober since I usually take on the designated driver role. Being the one who had to drive us back out of Philadelphia, I stuck to water while everyone else relaxed with drinks. As the night went on, I ended up playfully arguing with my wife over something small. It was just the kind of light-hearted bickering couples do, and to be honest, I was mostly just messing with her. I was throwing out exaggerated arguments about the best way to do something in a game, really just trying to get her riled up for fun. Her dad, who at this point was very drunk, wandered over and saw us going back and forth. He started laughing and, in what he thought was a funny gesture, decided to show her how to deal with me. Out of nowhere, he reached out and punched me right below the belt. He didn't do it full force, thankfully, but let me tell you, even a light hit in that area is enough to completely knock the wind out of you. I doubled over, caught off guard, while everyone else laughed. Later that evening, he came back to apologize. He even told me that if I wanted to get him back, I should just go ahead and punch him the same way. But I wasn't about to start swinging at my father-in-law. I brushed it off in the moment, but deep down, I knew I'd find a way to return the favor. And when I did, I wanted it to be clever. Fast forward about a month later, when Pokemon Legends Arceus came out. The game was huge, and pretty much everyone in my wife's family got a copy, including her dad. We all started playing around the same time, but I finished the game way quicker than everyone else. I've been hunting shiny Pokemon for years, so my collection was already stacked, and I had carried some of my favorites over into this game. One of them was my prized shiny Giratina. Now here's where it gets interesting. While experimenting in the game, I stumbled across a glitch that almost no one seemed to know about yet. I discovered that if a shiny Giratina used the move Shadow Sneak, it would completely crash the Nintendo Switch. Not just the game, it would force the entire system to shut down. The only way to keep playing was to restart the device. I had tested it enough to realize it wasn't just a one-time bug. It happened consistently. So, when the family got together again at my sister-in-law's house, I decided it was time for some petty revenge. We were all sitting around playing Pokemon, and I casually offered to trade them some of my shinies. I made it seem like I had way more than I really did, just so it didn't raise any suspicion. Knowing my father-in-law's taste, I was certain he'd be thrilled to get a shiny Giratina, and sure enough, he was. I traded it to him without saying anything else, and then I just waited. Honestly, I waited so long that I almost forgot I had set the whole thing up. Months passed before the payoff finally came. One day when we were hanging out again, he started complaining about his Switch. He said it kept crashing while he was playing Arceus, and he couldn't figure out why. He told us he had already uninstalled and reinstalled the game. He'd even restarted his entire system multiple times, but nothing seemed to fix it. The crashes just kept happening, and he was at his wit's end. That's when I leaned over and casually asked, "Oh, is it whenever you use Shadow Sneak with that Giratina I gave you?" The room went quiet. He froze. And then I followed up with, "That's for punching me in the belt back in December." It took him a second to process, but when it clicked, he burst out laughing. He actually respected it. In his own words, he said, "Oh my god, I wasted real time on that. I respect the long con." He couldn't stop laughing, and honestly, neither could anyone else in the family once they realized what I'd done. The timing made it even funnier, because just a few days later, online articles started popping up about that exact glitch in Arceus. But he had already found out from me the hard way, months before it went public. At that point, it turned into one of those family stories that everyone thought was hilarious, even him. And to this day, it's still one of the funniest little bits of petty revenge I've ever pulled off. That story wraps up here. That's such a smart way to handle it. Instead of lashing out in the moment, he waited and set up something harmless, but still memorable. The fact that the father-in-law laughed and respected it makes it even better. It feels like one of those stories that keeps getting funnier every time the family brings it up. This next story is about a house cleaner who got petty revenge on a client after being accused of not properly cleaning the shower. I make my living cleaning houses. It's not the most glamorous job out there, but it gives me the flexibility I need. I get to set my own hours, which means I can actually be home with my kid instead of being stuck in a rigid 9 to 5. Over time, I've built up a mix of clients, some who are genuinely wonderful and make me feel appreciated, and some who, let's just say, are not so great to deal with. Yesterday, I was working at one of the not so great houses. I was in the middle of scrubbing down the bathroom when the client came in with this snarky little comment. She looked at the shower, motioned to the bottles lined up along the shelves, and asked, "Do you actually remove all that stuff when you clean it?" Her tone was sharp, almost like she was accusing me of cutting corners. I told her as calmly as I could that yes, of course I do. I take pride in cleaning properly. She just shrugged and said, "Oh, just making sure," before walking off like she had caught me doing something wrong. The way she said it stuck with me. It wasn't the words so much as the attitude. She made it sound like she thought I was lazy or careless, and that bothered me because I know how much effort I put into my work. See, I actually care about the details. I make sure that after I clean a shower, everything goes back exactly the way I found it. If there are 3 bottles in a row, they go back in that same order. If a razor was leaning a certain way, I'll set it back like that. I even take the time to snake the drain so the water flows better. It's not something most cleaners bother with, but I like knowing I've left the place genuinely better than when I walked in. So hearing her question me like that, it got under my skin. It felt like she had already decided I wasn't doing a good job, even though I've left her shower spotless every single time. Normally, I let comments like that roll off my back. Clients say things without thinking, or they project their own frustrations, and it's not worth my energy to take it personally. But this time, I'll admit, I let it get to me. When I was done scrubbing and rinsing, I put everything back in the shower like usual. Only this time, I made a small adjustment. I didn't put everything back in the exact order I found it. Instead, I switched things around. The shampoo went where the conditioner used to be. The body wash got moved, and so on. Everything was still on the right shelf, neatly lined up, but the order was different. It wasn't much. I didn't trash her stuff or move it out of reach, but I knew the next time she went in there, she'd reach for her shampoo and grab conditioner instead, or she'd notice her routine felt just slightly off. And that tiny little inconvenience was enough to satisfy the irritation I'd been holding on to. I know it was petty. It wasn't my best moment, and usually I pride myself on being completely professional, but her tone just rubbed me the wrong way, and I couldn't resist giving her a harmless little taste of her own medicine. In my mind, it was like saying, "Yes, I do clean under all your bottles, but now enjoy putting them back in the right order yourself." She strikes me as the kind of person who spends too much time online, probably watching those overly dramatic cleaning videos where people pretend like they're exposing bad cleaners. So maybe her comment came from that mindset. Either way, I left her shower spotless, the drain flowing perfectly, and her shelves neatly organized, just not in the exact way she left them. That story wraps up here. That one made me laugh a little because the revenge was so subtle but effective. It's the kind of move that wouldn't ruin anyone's day, but it would definitely make them pause and notice. I like how the storyteller kept it clean but still got their point across. It's the sort of small payback that fits perfectly with the petty revenge vibe. This next story is about an IT apprentice whose team accidentally bricked the CEO's parents' clinic network while thinking they were working on a demo unit. When I first started my apprenticeship in IT, I expected to learn by making little mistakes here and there. The kind you laugh about later, like plugging a cable into the wrong port or mislabeling a drive. What I didn't expect was for one of those mistakes to take down an entire medical clinic's network. And not just any clinic, our CEO's parents' clinic. The company I worked for specialized in managing networks for medical practices. Our bread and butter was keeping clinics online, secure, and functioning smoothly. Every system we set up was built on Unify gear. Our office used it, every practice we supported used it, and the CEO's parents' clinic, conveniently located right next door, was no exception. The networks were all tied together through Unify's management portal, which made it easy to configure and monitor devices. But that centralization also made it dangerously easy to confuse one system for another. On the day it happened, a colleague of mine had been tasked with setting up a demo server rack. Nothing groundbreaking, just a standard piece of work we'd done plenty of times before. The instructions were clear. Plug a laptop directly into the Unify Dream machine in the rack via LAN. Make sure Wi-Fi was turned off so there was no chance of accidentally connecting to the wrong system. Load up a backup image, and then add the device into enterprise management. It was supposed to be routine. We went step by step. Laptop plugged in? Check. Wi-Fi disabled? Check. Backup loaded? Check. We were feeling confident, like this was just another quick job we could knock out without incident. After finishing, we disconnected the LAN cable, fully expecting to see the demo unit appear in the management portal where we could finish configuring it. Except it didn't. The device never showed up. We refreshed the portal, checked settings, and waited, but it was like the dream machine had vanished into thin air. My colleague frowned, and we both leaned over the screen, poking around to figure out what went wrong. Maybe the backup image didn't apply properly. Maybe the device had crashed during the process. We retraced our steps, convinced it had to be something simple. That's when we noticed something odd happening next door. The CEO's parents' clinic, whose network was routed just behind ours, suddenly lost their connection. 1 second they were online, and the next their phones, workstations, and internet went completely dark. The timing was too suspicious to ignore. We froze, dread creeping in as the realization dawned on us. Slowly, the pieces clicked together. The interface we had been configuring wasn't the demo unit at all. It wasn't even the device providing connectivity to our office rack. Somehow we had managed to connect directly into the clinic's live production system. And because the system's name matched the backup we were restoring, we hadn't noticed. In other words, we had just overwritten the CEO's parents' entire clinic network with a demo backup. For a solid moment, no one spoke. It felt like the room shrank. The air got heavy, and my stomach dropped. I could already imagine the fallout. Doctors unable to access patient records, phones down, staff scrambling. And above all, the knowledge that this wasn't just any client. It was family. The CEO's family. Panic set in. We scrambled to undo the damage. But once you push a full backup image onto a device, there's no magic undo button. We had to rebuild, reconfigure, and restore as quickly as possible. My colleague was frantically typing commands while I double-checked everything, terrified we'd make things even worse. Meanwhile, word started spreading through the office. People whispered about how the clinic next door had gone down and how we were the ones who did it. It wasn't long before supervisors knew. And when you're in IT, you know how fast bad news travels. Nobody found it funny. Nobody brushed it off as a harmless mistake. The atmosphere was tense, and I felt like I was standing in front of a firing squad waiting for the hammer to drop. Eventually, we got the clinic back online. It wasn't instant, and it definitely wasn't graceful, but by the end of the ordeal, phones were ringing again, internet was restored, and the system was running. The CEO's parents had their network back, though I'm sure they weren't thrilled about the downtime. That incident became a turning point for how we handled demo work. Up until then, we had been a little too casual about using the same Unify account for everything: production systems, client networks, and demo units. After what happened, that was no longer acceptable. From that day forward, a new policy was enforced. We created a completely separate Unify account dedicated solely to demos and non-production work. That account had zero access to the company's own network and, most importantly, zero access to the clinic next door. It was a harsh lesson in just how easy it is to mess up when systems look alike. A single oversight, a simple assumption, and suddenly you're not just testing, you're bricking something vital. And when that something belongs to the CEO's family, the stakes feel a lot higher. I can laugh about it now, but at the time, my heart was in my throat. It taught me to double-check every single connection, every single device name, every single step. Because in IT, the line between routine and disaster can be one click wide. That's the end of this story. That one felt like a nightmare scenario for anyone in IT. It's the kind of mistake that's easy to make, but has huge consequences. And the fact that it was the CEO's parents makes it almost unbelievable. You can just picture the silence in the office when everyone realized what had happened. It's a reminder that sometimes the scariest part of the job isn't the tech failing, it's human error. This next story is about someone going through the heartbreaking loss of their beloved dog, and how an unexpected act of kindness from a child made one of the hardest nights a little easier. Last year, my little dog Yadi, a Maltipoo, went into heart failure. I can still remember how terrifying it was when we first got that diagnosis. Thankfully, the vet stepped in right away and managed to stabilize him. They started him on several medications to help keep his heart from failing again, and for a while, things were under control. I clung to that hope, to the idea that maybe with the right treatment, we could have more time together. Yadi wasn't just a pet to me. He was my baby, my constant companion, the one who could brighten even the darkest days. Every wag of his tail, every little bark, every time he curled up next to me on the couch, it meant everything. So when July came around this year and he suddenly declined overnight, my heart sank in a way that's hard to put into words. It all happened so fast. One moment he was okay, and by the middle of the night, I knew something was really wrong. My husband and I rushed him to the emergency vet at 2 a.m. That drive felt endless. Even though we were flying down empty streets in the middle of the night, the sound of his labored breathing in the back seat will stay with me forever. The second we walked through those doors, the vet tech immediately took him to the back. They told us to have a seat, but I couldn't settle. My body felt heavy, and yet my mind was racing in circles. I clung to my husband's arm, trying to hold myself together, but I was falling apart. I didn't want to believe this was the end. And then something unexpected happened. As we sat there in that waiting room, filled with fear and grief, a young boy, no older than maybe 10 years old, came over to me. He held out a cup of water and, in the most gentle voice, said, "I'm sorry your dog is sick." It was such a simple gesture, but in that moment, it cracked through the heaviness that was suffocating me. I took the water, thanked him, and felt a little piece of kindness when I needed it most. Unfortunately, the news we got from the vet was what I had been dreading. Yadi was in full heart failure. His lungs were filled with fluid, and every breath was a struggle for him. I could see the pain he was in. My husband and I, along with the vet who had been so compassionate and clear with us, made the decision no pet owner ever wants to face. We decided it was time to let him go. That moment was one of the hardest of my life. Sitting there, holding him, knowing it would be the last time. My heart shattered. Even now, I feel that ache every time I think about it. Yadi was my everything, my little shadow, and losing him was like losing a part of myself. But even with all that pain, I can't stop thinking about that little boy. His face, his words, the way he noticed me sitting there, a complete mess, and decided to do something about it. He didn't have to say anything. He didn't have to go out of his way, but he did. And in that moment, his kindness meant the world to me. I often find myself wishing I knew who he was. I wish I could tell him how much that small act of compassion mattered, how it stayed with me on one of the worst nights of my life. I wish I could tell his parents how proud they should be of him, because they're raising an incredible son, a child who has already shown more empathy and understanding than many adults ever do. It's strange how sometimes the smallest gestures leave the deepest marks. That boy didn't change what was happening, but he gave me a moment of comfort. And that comfort, in the middle of overwhelming heartbreak, was priceless. To that young boy, wherever he is, thank you. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible in my grief. Thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists, even when the world feels like it's falling apart. You truly helped me on such a sad night, and I know you will grow into an amazing man. That's the end of the story. That one really hits deep. It's awesome how such a small act, like a cup of water and a kind word, can stay with someone forever. That kid probably doesn't even realize how much he helped in that moment. Makes you think about how little things we do can end up meaning a lot more than we expect. This next story is about a hotel worker who had an unusual late-night encounter with a guest who wanted help with a mosquito in her room. Working night shifts at a hotel, I've grown used to seeing unusual situations come up when people least expect them. Guests can be unpredictable, and you never quite know what kind of request will land at the front desk. I've had people ask for extra pillows at 3 in the morning, guests who lock themselves out of their rooms in nothing but a towel, and even the occasional frantic parent looking for snacks for a crying child. But one night, around midnight, I had a guest approach me with a problem that was so oddly specific that it left me scratching my head long after she walked away. It started with a young woman walking up to the desk. She looked exhausted, like someone who had been tossing and turning in bed instead of actually sleeping. Her English wasn't strong, and from the sound of her accent, I think Korean may have been her first language. She greeted me politely enough, and then, without any hesitation, said, "Hello, I have a mosquito in my room." For a moment, I just blinked at her. I wasn't sure if I'd heard her correctly. People complain about all sorts of things in hotels: noise, broken remotes, missing towels, uncomfortable mattresses. But this was the first time someone had come to me about a mosquito. Trying to figure out what she wanted, I asked, "What can I do for you?" She repeated, a little more urgently this time, "I have mosquito. I can't sleep." She waved her hands in front of her face for emphasis. I'll admit, I was still confused. Was she just informing me? Did she want me to go up to the room and remove it? Did she expect us to have some sort of emergency pest control protocol? I didn't want to seem unhelpful, but I also genuinely didn't know what she wanted me to do. Then she elaborated. She said she needed spray, repellent she could put on her skin, because the mosquito was keeping her awake. She even added sound effects, saying it kept going beep beep right by her ear. That made me smile, because even though she was frustrated, the way she described it was almost endearing. To make sure I fully understood, she pulled out her phone, opened Google Translate, and showed me the word mosquito on the screen. At that point, I definitely knew what she was asking for. The problem was, we're a small hotel. We don't carry insect repellent at the desk, and certainly not in the middle of the night. So I told her we didn't have any. Her face dropped. She looked so disappointed, like she had been counting on me to swoop in and save her from this tiny flying menace. I could almost feel how let down she was, and it made me wish I had something to offer her. Wanting to lighten the mood, I said with a small laugh, "Usually I just catch them." I figured if nothing else, humor might break the tension. But she shook her head, clearly frustrated. "I can't catch it," she said, and she tried to explain more in broken English, but I couldn't follow exactly what she meant. Maybe it was flying too fast, or maybe she was scared to swat at it. Whatever the reason, she was clearly overwhelmed. Half joking, half serious, I asked, "Would you like me to help you catch it?" Her eyes widened, and she immediately waved her hands. "No!" The idea of me coming up to her room to hunt a mosquito was apparently too much, and that was where the conversation stalled out. I apologized again, told her once more that we didn't have repellent available, and admitted there wasn't much else I could do. She left the desk, still looking unsatisfied, and I went back to my paperwork with the encounter lingering in my mind. The whole situation struck me as both strange and oddly human. On one hand, yes, it was unusual. In 2 years of working at the front desk, no one had ever come to me complaining about a mosquito in their room. It felt like such a small thing to seek help for, especially when I couldn't actually do anything about it. On the other hand, I could understand her frustration. Anyone who's ever had a mosquito buzzing around their ear at night knows how maddening it can be. The tiny sound, the itchy bites, the constant swatting in the dark. It really can ruin a night's sleep. So, was it an odd request? Definitely. Was it a cultural difference? Possibly. In some countries, hotels might be expected to provide repellent or even help catch the mosquito themselves. Or maybe she was just desperate, too tired to think straight, and figured the front desk could solve anything. Either way, it was one of those moments that reminded me how unique every shift can be. That's where the story ends. A mosquito is such a tiny thing, but it can completely ruin your night if it keeps buzzing around your head. You can tell both of them were trying their best, but the language gap made the whole exchange even funnier. And honestly, the idea of going to the front desk like it's an emergency hotline for one mosquito is kind of endearing in its own way. This next story is about someone who finally stood up to their toxic uncle after years of being mocked and belittled at family gatherings. For most of my life, I avoided confrontation like the plague. I grew up in a family where speaking up usually came with consequences. If you tried to defend yourself, you'd get punished, talked over, or gaslighted until you doubted your own memory of the event. The message was always the same: keep quiet, swallow your feelings, and be the bigger person. And when it came to my Uncle Dave, that lesson got drilled in harder than ever. Uncle Dave has always been the kind of guy who thrives on putting other people down. He liked being the loudest voice in the room, and most of the time, that meant belittling someone else. Usually it happened at family gatherings when he'd had too much to drink. He'd crack jokes at someone's expense, then throw his head back in laughter like it was the funniest thing in the world. And because no one challenged him, he just kept doing it. For years, I was one of his favorite targets. He mocked my weight when I was younger, threw digs at my career choices, and even made fun of my anxiety. Sometimes he'd do it directly, looking me in the eye with that smug grin, and other times he'd make snide little remarks under the guise of just joking. Everyone else would chuckle nervously or stay silent, and I'd sit there frozen, wishing I could disappear into the floor. I wanted to speak up, to tell him to stop, but the words never came. My throat would close up, my face would burn, and I'd retreat into myself, silently taking the hit. It wasn't until my late 20s that something started to shift. By then, I'd grown more confident in myself, mostly through my job in tech. I had carved out a career I was proud of. I wasn't where I wanted to be yet, but I had worked hard to get where I was, and I finally felt like I had a real sense of direction. And the more I started to value myself, the less tolerance I had for people who treated me like garbage. Uncle Dave was right at the top of that list. The final straw came last Christmas. The whole family was gathered around the dining table, plates full of food, the usual holiday chatter filling the air. Uncle Dave, true to form, was already on one of his rants. He had a drink in his hand, his voice booming as he went on about how lazy my generation was. He always loved to generalize, acting like everything he didn't understand was worthless. I sat there, fork in hand, feeling the tension rise in my chest. I knew it was only a matter of time before he turned the spotlight on me. And sure enough, he did. He looked straight at me and said something along the lines of, "Your so-called job in tech isn't even real work. Sitting at a computer all day? That's not a career. That's just kids playing pretend." Normally, I would have forced a laugh, maybe stared at my plate and willed the moment to pass, but not this time. I could feel my pulse in my ears, the anger bubbling up, and I knew I wasn't going to swallow it again. I set my fork down, pushed back my chair slightly, and stood up. With my voice steady but my hands trembling, I looked at him and said, "Actually, Uncle Dave, you have no idea what my job involves. I've worked my butt off to get here, and I'm proud of what I do. If you can't respect that, then maybe it's time we stop pretending we can have conversations." The room went dead silent. You could hear the clinking of someone nervously setting down their glass. My heart was pounding, and my whole body was shaking, but at the same time, I felt this wave of pride. For the first time in years, I had defended myself. Uncle Dave tried to brush it off with his usual playbook. He smirked and said I was being too sensitive, that I couldn't take a joke. But this time, I didn't back down. I held my ground and said, "No, you've been crossing the line for years. I'm not your punching bag anymore." Out of the corner of my eye, I could see my parents staring at me in surprise. They didn't say anything to defend me, but they also didn't rush to defend him, which was a first. And the rest of the table? Nobody laughed. Nobody encouraged him. For once he stood there without an audience willing to indulge him. His face turned red, and he looked more embarrassed than anything else. He mumbled something under his breath about how I used to be fun, and then he let the subject drop. The conversation awkwardly moved on, but the tone of the entire night had shifted. I walked away from that dinner table feeling lighter than I had in years. It was like carrying a weight around for decades and finally setting it down. The next time I saw him, he wasn't nearly as bold. He kept his comments to himself and acted noticeably more reserved around me. And honestly, I think he's still a little shocked that I didn't just take it anymore. It's wild to think one moment, one decision to finally speak up, could change the entire dynamic. It didn't erase all the years of hurt, but it showed me something important, that I had more power than I realized. And even though it made things tense for a little while, it was worth every second of discomfort. For the first time in my life, I stood up to him, and I don't plan on going back. That story ends there. That one was powerful. You could almost sense the years of silence breaking in that single moment. Standing up to someone who's been a bully for so long isn't easy, but it completely changes how you see yourself. And honestly, it's kind of satisfying imagining the whole room going quiet while the uncle got called out. This next story is about an employee who discovered their boss's boss had casually taken and eaten the chips they personally ordered and paid extra for. I just started a new job recently, and I'm still learning how the office works, both the actual workflow and the unspoken rules of office politics. I don't know if I'm just being petty here, but something happened this week that left me baffled. We had a group lunch order at work. The team decided on Jersey Mike's, and everyone submitted their orders online. I wanted a little something extra, so I spent the additional $2.50 to get a bag of Miss Vicky's jalapeno chips with my sandwich. Nothing crazy, but it was a deliberate choice. I was looking forward to having that crunch on the side with my lunch. The food arrived right on time, but I was about 10 minutes late to pick mine up because I had a telehealth appointment scheduled. By the time I walked over to the kitchen area where the order had been dropped off, I saw my sandwich sitting there waiting for me. The bag with my name was still there, but something was missing. The chips. At first I thought maybe they'd been left out of the order. It happens. Sometimes restaurants forget a drink or a side. I asked a couple of coworkers if they'd seen my chips, and that's when things took a strange turn. Eventually, my boss's boss, the guy who sits 2 levels above me in the company hierarchy, admitted that he had taken them. He didn't say it with any embarrassment or even the slightest hint of apology. He just casually mentioned that he had grabbed the chips, that he had eaten them or was in the process of eating them, and then dismissed me because he was on a call. I stood there, kind of stunned. I didn't know what to say. If it had been one of my peers or even my direct manager, I might have joked about it or pushed back a little. But this was my boss's boss. Leadership twice removed. Someone who could technically fire my manager if he felt like it. So all I could manage was a weak, "Oh, okay, go for it, all good." Meanwhile, I sat down and ate my sandwich, while just a few feet away, my boss's boss happily crunched away on the spicy jalapeno chips I had paid extra for. It was surreal. I couldn't stop wondering, who does that? I mean, it wasn't like these chips were part of some communal spread. It wasn't like we had ordered 10 sandwiches and a big box of random chips for everyone to share. Out of the 8 people who ordered lunch, only 3 of us had added chips to our meals. They weren't extras. They weren't up for grabs. They were individually ordered items that had been paid for by each person, and I had only been gone for 10 minutes, not an hour, not long enough for someone to reasonably assume that leftovers were up for grabs, just long enough for me to step away for a telehealth appointment and come right back. Sitting there, it reminded me of high school. when kids would swipe food off your tray just to be jerks. Only now, it wasn't some classmate, it was someone in upper management, and the casual way he admitted it made me question whether it was just cluelessness or some sort of subtle power play. Like, was he making a point that he could take whatever he wanted and no one could say anything? Or was he genuinely oblivious to how inappropriate it was? The whole situation left me stuck. What do you even do when it's your boss's boss who crosses a line? If I'd said something sharper, would that have backfired? I've only been here a week, so the last thing I want to do is start making enemies in leadership. But at the same time, it feels so bizarre to have to swallow the fact that someone in a senior role thought my chips were fair game. After lunch, I kept overthinking it. Was I overreacting? Was this just a normal part of returning to office life? People grabbing what they want and shrugging it off? Or was it as odd as it felt to me? I know Reddit has a love for drama, so part of me feels silly for posting about a bag of chips, but it honestly stuck with me. The conformist part of my brain told me to drop it, that maybe I was being pedantic, but another part couldn't get over how weird it was that someone in his position thought nothing of taking something that wasn't his, something clearly ordered and paid for by someone else. And it wasn't like chips were piling up on the counter with nobody claiming them. I was one of only 3 people who ordered them. It was obvious they were spoken for. So now I'm just left wondering if this was a one-off oddity, or if it's a red flag about what working under him is going to be like. Either way, I didn't get my chips, and I still feel unsettled that it even happened. That's where this story ends. That one really does feel strange. It's such a small thing, but the fact that it came from someone in a leadership position makes it feel bigger than it is. It leaves this awkward impression, like you're supposed to laugh it off, but deep down it doesn't sit right. Honestly, the quiet part of the story is how powerless it feels when the person taking your food is also the person who holds that much authority. This next story is about someone who accidentally mixed up their dog's medicine with their own lunch and paid the price in the most uncomfortable way. My dog has been on these massive antibiotics ever since he had a tooth pulled. They're the kind of pills you'd never want to swallow yourself. Huge, chalky, and hard to hide. The only way to get him to take them was with a little trick I came up with. I'd take a slice of cheddar cheese, fold it neatly around the pill, and hand it to him. He'd swallow it in one bite, wagging his tail, none the wiser. It worked perfectly every single time, and it became such a routine that I didn't even think about it anymore. It was just automatic. The trouble came one morning when I was half asleep and rushing. I'd stayed up too late the night before, and when my alarm went off, I rolled out of bed groggy, barely awake, just trying to get both my dog fed and my lunch packed before heading to work. I had the cheese out on the counter, I had the ham, I had the bread. I also had the pill bottle sitting there, ready to go. In my sleepy haze, I went on autopilot. Without realizing it, I made his cheese pill treat, and then, instead of setting it aside for him, I slapped it right onto the sandwich I was building for myself. It seemed so normal at the time. My dog was wagging around my feet, so I tossed him a slice of ham as a little treat. He was happy. I felt like I had done my job, and I quickly wrapped up my sandwich in foil, dropped it into my bag, and ran out the door. The thought didn't cross my mind again. By the time lunch rolled around at work, I was starving. I sat down at my desk, unwrapped my sandwich, and took a big, satisfying bite. At first, it tasted perfectly fine. The salty ham, the creamy cheddar, the soft bread. But then I hit something weird. It felt chalky against my teeth, like biting into powdery gravel. My first thought was that maybe there was a small bone or some kind of hard bit that had slipped into the deli meat. I pulled the sandwich apart to check, and that's when my stomach dropped. Right there, sticking out between 2 layers of cheese, was half of a giant pink pill. I froze. For a second, my brain tried to deny it. Maybe it was just something in the cheese. Maybe I was imagining things. But no, it was unmistakable. It was my dog's antibiotic, the exact same ones I had been carefully hiding in cheese for weeks. And that's when everything clicked in my head. I hadn't given him his pill that morning. I'd given him plain ham, the cheese wrap pill I made absent-mindedly. I had put it on my own sandwich. I had just taken a huge bite out of it. The embarrassment hit me almost as quickly as the panic. I mean, how do you even explain that? Who mixes up their dog's medication with their lunch? I grabbed the pill bottle out of my bag, double-checked, and sure enough, the pill matched. Same size, same color, same everything. I wasn't imagining it. I had really eaten my dog's medicine. At that point, I had two choices. Either sit there and hope for the best, or call the vet and admit what happened. I chose the second option, though I was dreading the conversation. I dialed the number, got connected to a tech, and tried to explain. So, this is going to sound ridiculous, but I think I just ate one of my dog's antibiotics. There was a long pause on the other end, like they were deciding whether I was joking. When they realized I wasn't kidding, they actually handled it really calmly. They told me not to panic, that the antibiotic itself wasn't harmful to people, but since it was such a large dose, I'd probably have some stomach side effects. That was not comforting to hear while sitting at my desk in the middle of the workday. And sure enough, they were right. Within an hour, my stomach started cramping. It wasn't the kind of pain you can just ignore, either. It was sharp, persistent, and came in waves. The rest of my afternoon was a nightmare of me running back and forth between my desk and the bathroom, regretting every single life choice that had led me to that point. Meanwhile, my dog was at home, perfectly fine, relaxing in his bed with his little belly full of plain ham. He was living the good life, and I was suffering at work because I couldn't tell the difference between a slice of cheese and a medicated snack. Looking back on it now, it's almost funny how avoidable the whole thing was. If I had just taken 2 extra seconds to pay attention, it never would have happened. But in that moment, when I was half asleep and trying to juggle everything, I completely lost track. And instead of helping my dog stay healthy, I ended up giving myself the kind of lunch surprise nobody wants. It's one of those mistakes that's so ridiculous, you can't help but laugh about it afterward, even if it was miserable at the time. But I can promise you one thing. I will never again prepare my dog's medication and my own food at the same time. Ever. Lesson learned the hard way. That story ends there. That mix-up is hilarious in hindsight, even if it was rough in the moment. It's one of those things that really shows how autopilot mornings can lead to the weirdest problems. The detail of the dog sitting at home happy with his ham while the owner suffered makes it even funnier. That's the kind of story people remember for years. This next story is about someone who went through a grueling interview process only to be blindsided at the end with an unexpected demand to relocate. I just wrapped up what has to be the most frustrating interview experience of my life, and it's still eating at me. It all started when a recruiter reached out about a job at a software as a service company. The position was described as mostly remote, and they explained that I would only need to come into the office twice a month. Since the office was about 4 hours from where I live, that seemed completely manageable. I thought the expectations were clear from the start. From there, things snowballed into a marathon. I went through 6 different interviews, 6 separate calls, meetings, and conversations, each one dragging me deeper into the process. On top of that, they assigned me a take-home project. It wasn't just a little exercise either. It was a 5-hour-long assignment. When they first sent it over, I actually pushed back. I told them outright that I couldn't spend that much time unless they were seriously considering me. I didn't want to waste hours working on something for free if I wasn't a strong candidate. That's when the department's vice president personally called me. He assured me that I was at the top of their list. He said they were very interested and wanted me to move forward with the project because they saw me as one of the strongest options. Hearing that directly from someone at his level made me feel a little better. So I took the time, did the project, and submitted it. It took up time I should have been spending with my family, but I figured the effort would be worth it if this really was a good opportunity. Fast forward to what I thought was the final call. I joined the meeting expecting to talk about next steps, maybe even an offer. Instead, the hiring manager opened with a question that completely blindsided me. "So are you able to relocate?" I sat there stunned for a second. Relocate? That hadn't been mentioned once throughout the entire process. From the very first conversation, it had been clear that this was supposed to be mostly remote. They knew exactly where I lived. They knew I had a family. They knew I had agreed to the 2 days per month in-office requirement. Now, after 6 interviews and a 5-hour project, they suddenly wanted me to pick up my whole life and move closer to their office. I stayed calm, even though I was irritated beyond belief. I explained that the salary they were offering wasn't anywhere near enough to justify uprooting my entire family and moving. I reminded them that they had reached out to me in the first place. They had known from day one that I lived 4 hours away. I also pointed out that my professional network in my current city could actually be a huge advantage for them if I stayed put. Instead of addressing any of that, the hiring manager just kind of brushed it off and said, we'll look into it. That was basically the end of the conversation. I didn't hear from them directly again. A few days later, it was the recruiter who called to tell me the outcome. And instead of trying to salvage the situation, the recruiter casually dropped that the company had now decided they needed someone in the office 4 days a week. 4 days. Not even 2 days. Not even fully remote, but almost full-time in the office. At that point, I realized the whole process had been a waste of my time. They were never serious about me as a candidate if they knew all along that relocation was what they wanted. I had spent weeks scheduling interviews, stressing over calls, preparing answers, and then sinking hours into a project that gave them free work. All of that time was taken away from my family, and for what? Just to get a last-minute bait and switch. Looking back on it now, the most insulting part wasn't even the wasted time. It was the cowardice. Instead of owning up to the decision and calling me themselves, they pushed it off on the recruiter to be the messenger. After everything I had invested, they didn't even have the decency to speak to me directly. When the recruiter told me they were going with someone else who could be in the office 4 days a week, I wasn't even surprised. At that point, the only thing left to feel was disappointment. It was just one more reminder of how messy and disorganized the job market has become. Companies drag candidates through endless hoops, pile on unpaid work, and then change the rules at the very last second. It's exhausting, and it leaves you feeling like the whole system is broken. That's where the whole thing ended. A drawn-out process with nothing to show for it but wasted time and a bitter taste in my mouth. That's the end of this story. Man, that's the kind of story that just makes you shake your head. Going through that many interviews already feels like a marathon, and then they move the finish line at the last second. What sticks out is how casually they shifted the whole deal. Like all the time spent didn't matter. Stuff like this really shows how draining the job hunt can be. It's a tough reminder of how often people get strung along for no reason. This next story is about two neighbors who barely spoke until a middle of the night fire alarm forced them outside and changed everything. For the longest time, I thought of myself as someone who just quietly coexisted with the people around me. I lived in a calm, almost sleepy apartment complex, the kind of place where people gave polite nods in the hallway, but never really moved beyond that. Everyone seemed wrapped up in their own little world, myself included. One of those neighbors was the guy in 3B. He was tall, usually had big headphones over his ears, and his whole vibe just said, "Keep to myself." Whenever we passed each other, the most I ever got out of him was a casual, "Hey," and I'd nod back. That was the extent of our relationship for months. Then one night, everything flipped. It was about 2 in the morning when the fire alarm went off. Not just a little beep or a one-time chirp, but that shrill, piercing wail that rattles through the walls and makes your heart skip. It was relentless. I shot out of bed in a panic, heart pounding, not even sure what was going on. Instinct kicked in. I grabbed the first hoodie I could find, threw it on, and bolted out the door barefoot. The hallway was chaos, doors creaking open, people stumbling out half asleep, everyone looking confused. I followed the stream down the stairs and into the cool night air. The sound of the alarm still echoed behind us, bouncing off the concrete courtyard. I remember standing there, hugging my arms around myself, shivering in the chill. My mind was racing with worst-case scenarios. Was there actually a fire? Was this real? After a few minutes, it became clear it was a false alarm. A handful of residents, shaking their heads, turned right back inside. The crowd thinned quickly. Before long, it was just me lingering outside, still too wired to go back in. The cold air stung my feet, and I kept shifting from one to the other, but I couldn't bring myself to leave just yet. And that's when I saw him, the guy from 3B. He walked over, no headphones this time, holding 2 steaming mugs. Without much preamble, he handed one to me and said, "Figured you could use something warm." I was caught completely off guard. We had never had an actual conversation before, and here he was, showing up with tea like it was the most natural thing in the world. I took the mug, grateful for the heat that seeped through the ceramic and into my frozen hands. The steam rose up, carrying a faint, earthy smell that immediately grounded me. We ended up sitting together on the curb just outside the building. At first, the conversation was small, how long we'd both lived there, how loud the alarm had been, how ridiculous it was that these things always seemed to happen in the middle of the night. But slowly, the talk stretched. We got into music, sharing our favorite artists, then life, what brought us here, what we were working toward, what made us laugh. Time slipped away without either of us realizing it. By the time I checked the clock on my phone, it was 4 in the morning. The alarm had been silenced hours ago. The complex was quiet again, windows dark, but there we were, still sitting side by side, 2 steaming mugs long empty. It felt surreal. I had lived next to this person all this time, barely exchanging words, and now suddenly, it was like I'd cracked open a book I didn't know I had on my shelf. The next day, I heard a knock at my door. I opened it to see him standing there, headphones looped casually around his neck. He smiled and said, "Since we already survived a fire drill together, how about dinner?" And that was the start of something completely unexpected. From strangers to neighbors to something much more, all sparked by a false alarm at 2 in the morning. Looking back now, it almost feels like the universe hit that alarm just to get us both outside at the same time. That's where this story ends. That's such a sweet twist. It's funny how something as annoying as a fire alarm can turn into the start of something special. The little detail of him bringing out tea just makes it feel so genuine. Sometimes the best connections show up at the most random times. This next story is about someone who discovered their childhood bully had a hidden online life and is wrestling with whether to expose them. Looking back, middle school feels like a different planet. I remember the classrooms, the locker slams, the smell of cafeteria pizza, and most of all, I remember her. There was a girl who seemed to make it her mission to make my life miserable. She found little ways to humiliate me every single chance she got. She'd orchestrate these childish pranks, sending other girls to date me, and then laughing as if it was all some big joke. She'd mock my height, my hair, my background, whatever could be twisted to make someone feel smaller. I've carried those moments with me longer than I thought I would. I have no doubt a lot of them fed into the social anxiety I still work on now. Years pass and you tell yourself you've moved on. You get older, you get a job, you carve out a life. I started a side business doing digital work, helping people minimize their online footprint, clean up old accounts, and shift what shows when someone searches for them. It's detailed, sometimes tedious work. You learn where things hide, which platforms cache content forever, and how little corners of the internet can store surprising scraps of a life. One client came to me trying to rebrand, and part of the work was a deep sweep of public sites and niche platforms most folks never check. While digging through obscure places, I stumbled across a VR adult site with almost no traffic, videos with a few hundred views, and a sense that content got posted and mostly forgotten. Then I stopped scrolling. There she was, my middle school bully. Seeing her face there felt surreal. It wasn't a salacious shock so much as a jolt of disbelief, combined with a weird, sad feeling. The person who used to stand in a classroom and make a show out of someone else's worst moments was now in a private corner of the internet, doing something none of our old classmates had any idea about. I closed the tab because this was work, not some late-night curiosity. Still, the image lodged in my head. Nobody else knew. Not her family, not her old friends, not anyone from back then. It felt like holding a hot stone in my pocket. Small, but impossible to ignore. With that came sharp thoughts. I imagined messaging her family, telling them what I'd found. I pictured shaking up the life she'd built in quiet ways, watching everything unravel the way she had once unraveled me. It would be punishment, I told myself. It would be an equalizer. The temptation felt physical. Sometimes when I had a quiet minute, the urge returned, nagging at me like an itch. I pictured the shock on her parents' faces. I imagined the explanations she would have to make. The idea of exposing her felt satisfying in that immediate way, like settling a score. But then I thought about the consequences. I remembered the lines I draw professionally when helping clients with online privacy. Information can protect, but it can also destroy. Revelations can ripple outward and harm things beyond your intention. I thought about the legal and ethical borders, and about the fact that using that knowledge as a weapon would make me the kind of person I don't want to be. So far, I haven't done anything. I haven't messaged her family, I haven't shared links or screenshots, and most likely I won't. That choice doesn't make the thought go away. Far from it. Some days it comes up when I'm brushing my teeth. Some days it barges into my head in the middle of a meeting, and some nights it sits quietly behind everything else, like a low hum. It nags. It makes me stare at my phone longer than I should. It's honest to say that not acting is almost as heavy as acting would be. I also try to hold space for nuance. People are complicated. Maybe she's performing for a camera in ways that feel detached from the person I remember. Maybe she made choices for reasons I can't guess at. Maybe her life is full of contradictions, like most lives are. All of that doesn't erase the past, but it complicates the present. And somewhere in that complication, I find a sliver of reason to not blow everything up. I remind myself why I started doing privacy work to begin with, to help people control their digital presence when they want it, not to weaponize what I find for revenge. Mostly, I end up talking to myself about it more than to anyone else. I rehearse boundaries and remind myself of the risks of crossing them. I try to orient back to the person I want to be, someone who chooses restraint over a quick, destructive win. That doesn't make the feeling less intrusive, but it keeps me from doing something I would likely regret. For now, I let the secret sit where it is and focus on the things I can actually change. My business, my friends, the small parts of my life that grow because I tend to them. The tension remains, but so does the choice to walk away from a path that would harm more than heal. That's where this story ends. This is one of those situations that sticks with you, messy and hard to ignore. The impulse to retaliate is human, but so is the pause that keeps you from causing real damage. It takes a kind of quiet strength to hold back, especially when old hurts are involved. That restraint doesn't make the memory disappear, but it does say something about the person choosing not to escalate. This next story is about a teenager caught in the middle of family grief, where not showing sadness over a step-parent's death caused huge conflict with their father and stepsister. When my parents split, I was only 3 years old. At that age, you don't really understand divorce. You just know your life suddenly shifts between two homes. At first, things weren't terrible. My parents managed to stay on okay terms for a while. But by the time I turned 6, everything started to change. That was when my dad began dating the woman who would later become his wife. And from that moment on, there was constant tension. I remember overhearing her more times than I can count, at least 11 times myself, say that she hoped my mom would drop dead. And she didn't whisper it once or twice in frustration. She said it openly, with a level of seriousness that made my stomach twist. Her whole idea was that if my mom were gone, then she and my dad's family could have me all to themselves. It didn't matter that my parents shared custody equally, or that my mom was always there for me. Those words stuck. They planted a wall between me and my dad's wife that never really came down. She had a daughter, a year younger than me, and the two of us never got along. She was fiercely protective of her mom, and I was just as protective of mine. That meant every interaction between us felt like a battlefield. We argued, we clashed, and we never built anything close to what you call a sibling bond. To her, I was ungrateful. To me, her mom was a threat. It set the tone for everything that followed. Years went by. My dad and his wife had more kids, which meant I gained half-siblings. But even with more family around, my feelings toward her didn't shift. She wasn't someone I ever cared about or respected. She was simply part of my dad's life, which meant I had to put up with her during my time there. Nothing more, nothing less. Then, a few weeks ago, she passed away. It happened late at night, on a week when I was with my mom. The next day, I went over to my dad's house because I knew it was the right thing to do. When I walked in, the mood was heavy. My dad was wrecked. My half-siblings were distraught, crying in waves. Her daughter was crushed, completely gutted. Everywhere I looked, I saw tears, tissues, and the weight of grief filling the room. And then there was me, just standing there, awkwardly on the outside of it all. My dad tried to comfort me, telling me I didn't need to hold back my tears. He said it was okay to cry. But the truth was, there were no tears to hold back. I felt nothing. Not relief, not sadness, just a sort of emptiness. She was never someone I considered family. If anything, part of me felt a dark irony in it all. This was the same woman who wished my mom dead so many times, and now she was gone. I never said it out loud, but the thought lingered in the back of my mind. Her daughter noticed right away. She came up to me hours after I arrived and said I didn't look sad at all. Then she snapped, asking how much I must have hated her mom if I couldn't even look upset, like I had lost a second mother. I told her bluntly that her mom was never my second mother. That answer set her off. She stormed upstairs and wouldn't talk to me again that night. A few days later, my dad asked if I wanted to do something at the funeral. Maybe a reading, maybe share a memory. I didn't even hesitate before saying no. I wasn't going to stand up there and act like she was important to me. That decision set off her daughter again. She confronted me angrily, saying we were all supposed to participate as her children. I said the truth. I wasn't her child, and she wasn't my mom. Things boiled over after the funeral. Just a couple of days later, she exploded at my dad. She told him if I stayed in the house, she wouldn't. She said she could see in my face that I was glad her mom had died, that I didn't belong there, and that she hated me for it. She yelled that they had always wanted me to be a part of their family, but I'd rejected it because all I wanted was my mom. Then she admitted she couldn't even look at me without wanting to lash out physically. My dad tried to calm her, but it didn't work. She told him flat out that she hated me as much as I hated her mom. And when I heard that, I knew things were only going to escalate. Later, my dad pulled me aside. He said I should just show some grief, fake it if I had to, so that his stepdaughter wouldn't feel so hostile toward me. I told him point blank I wasn't going to fake emotions I didn't feel. He pushed again, saying my lack of grief was distracting and making everything harder for the family. He wanted me to put on a performance for her sake. That's when I told him I was going back to my mom's house. I wasn't going to stick around for things to get physical. I knew that if she lashed out and I fought back, I'd be the one blamed. Better to walk away than get dragged into that. He didn't take it well. He looked angry and hurt. He told me again that I could have faked it just for peace. But I stood firm. I wasn't going to pretend. I wasn't going to rewrite 10 years of resentment into fake grief for someone who openly wished my mom gone. Since then, he's been trying quietly to get me to come back. But his stepdaughter made it clear. If I return, she leaves. And she told him flat out that she was hurt he'd even ask me, instead of protecting her feelings. So now he's torn between us, trying to balance something that doesn't really have balance at all. That's where the story ends. That's such a tough spot to be in. The pressure to put on emotions you don't feel can be overwhelming, especially when everyone else expects it. What really stands out is how deep the divide ran long before the funeral, and how it all came to the surface once grief entered the picture. It's messy, but it also shows how complicated family dynamics can get when different loyalties collide. This next story starts with someone just trying to help out at work, but a small favor quickly snowballed into a routine they never expected to be stuck with. At the place where I work, there are a bunch of businesses all housed under one roof. Different companies, different teams, but we all share the same building and cross paths throughout the day. It creates this kind of mini community where people get to know each other even if they technically work for different employers. Not too long ago, one of the women from another company came back from maternity leave. She had a 2-month-old baby with her, and since childcare can be tough, the baby was sometimes around in the office. Everyone, in one way or another, chipped in to help. If she needed a quick break, someone would watch the baby for a few minutes. If he started fussing, people would step in with soothing words or silly faces. It turned into this shared responsibility, almost like the whole building unofficially became part of the baby's support team. Pretty early on, I noticed something that felt almost like a magic trick. Anytime I picked him up and walked around, he stopped fussing. I might not know much about babies, but I had a theory. Maybe it was because he was used to the constant motion of being in the womb. Either way, walking seemed to work. The crying would ease, his body would relax, and within minutes, the baby would be calm. Now here's the thing. I'm a runner. I'm used to thinking about movement in terms of miles, steps, and endurance. So instead of just pacing around in circles, I thought, why not make the most of this? It felt like an opportunity to get my steps in while helping out. Holding a baby isn't light either, so I figured it was kind of like a natural weighted vest. At first, I stuck with walking, but after a while, I started stepping it up. I began carrying him up and down the stairs, turning the routine into something like strength training. Soon I was even mixing in free weight exercises while holding him carefully. Surprisingly, the baby loved it. Every time I moved, his eyes would get heavy, and eventually he started falling asleep during our makeshift workouts. What had started as a way to calm him down turned into a full routine. Whenever he spotted me now, even when he wasn't upset, he would start reaching out for me, fussing if I didn't pick him up. It was almost like he had imprinted on me as his personal exercise trainer. At first I thought it was hilarious. Here I was, sweating with a baby on my shoulder, and it felt like a win-win. He got comfort, his mom got a break, and I got extra training out of it. I didn't mind the drool, the spit up, or the baby smell on my clothes. In fact, it felt kind of rewarding. People around the office even joked about me being the baby whisperer, since he seemed to settle with me so quickly. But over time, reality caught up. There were days when I had already gone for a long run before work, and by the time I got to the office, I was spent. My legs would be heavy, my energy drained, and the last thing I wanted was to climb 3 flights of stairs over and over again with a baby in my arms. On rest days, when I was supposed to be letting my muscles recover, I'd still find myself being motioned over, with the baby getting fussy until I picked him up. And of course, once he was in my arms, the expectation was that I'd move. Standing still wasn't an option. That's when the regret started creeping in. I realized I'd basically trained this baby to expect exercise every time he saw me. What started as a clever idea had turned into a trap I'd set for myself. He didn't want rocking, he didn't want padding. He wanted stair climbs, squats, and laps around the building. And if I didn't deliver, he made his disappointment very clear. I can't say I'm upset with him. It's not his fault. Babies pick up on patterns fast. But I can admit I didn't think this through at all. I introduced him to the wonderful world of exercise way too early, and now I'm paying the price every time he locks eyes with me and starts fussing until I get moving. That's where the story ends. That's actually pretty funny in a wholesome way. It's wild how quickly a baby can connect someone to comfort, and in this case, comfort meant workouts. The image of being guilt-tripped by a 2-month-old into doing stair climbs is kind of priceless. It's the sort of problem that's exhausting, but also makes for a great story later. This next story is about a teenager who broke one of their parents' strictest rules, only for a sibling's betrayal to make everything spiral. Growing up, I always knew my parents had very strict rules. They were the type to set high expectations for just about everything. My grades had to stay at a certain level, my appearance had to match what they thought was acceptable, and even the smallest things felt like they came with conditions. One of their more unusual rules was that anything they considered childish had no place in our lives past a certain age. That included toys, stuffed animals, or really anything that hinted at being too young. By the time I was 10, most of my things were gone. They either donated them, threw them out, or pressured me into giving them up. But I held on to one small piece of my childhood, my favorite stuffed animal. I couldn't part with it, so I hid it, tucked it away in my room, safe from being discovered, and for years, they never suspected a thing. That secret lasted until my little brother came snooping. He's 8, and one day he was digging around in my room, supposedly looking for money. Instead, he found my stuffed animal. Right away, he realized what he had in his hands: leverage. He smirked and told me that unless I gave him money, he'd run straight to our parents and spill my secret. I didn't want to risk it, so I caved. I gave him the money, thinking it would buy his silence, but he told them anyway. When my parents confronted me, the look on their faces was pure disappointment mixed with anger. They called me out for breaking the rules, for lying, for being too old to hold on to something like that. And instead of quietly taking it away, they wanted to make a point. They grounded me on the spot, and to really drive it home, they made me watch as they tossed my stuffed animal into the trash. Not just tossed either, they dumped gross stuff on it, making sure I couldn't be tempted to sneak it back. I stood there, fighting the urge to cry, watching the one piece of comfort I had be destroyed in front of me. When it was done, I asked if at least I could get the money my younger brother had taken from me back. They told me no, that I didn't deserve it, but I couldn't just leave it at that. Later, when the coast was clear, I dug through the trash and pulled it out. My friend is helping me clean it up now, trying to wash away the mess my parents poured over it, while I figure out a better hiding place. The whole thing has left me torn. On one hand, I know I broke their rule. On the other, I feel like it's such a pointless rule in the first place. My 12-year-old brother agrees with me. He's been on the receiving end of our younger brother's schemes too, and he thinks the whole no childish things rule is ridiculous. Still, part of me feels guilty for making my parents angry, even though all I really wanted was to keep something small that made me feel safe. That's where the story ends. That rule feels unnecessarily harsh. It's wild how something as harmless as a stuffed animal can turn into such a dramatic fight. The younger brother really stirred things up too, which makes the whole situation sting even more. It's one of those stories that shows how unfair things can feel when you're stuck under someone else's rules. This next story starts with what should have been a simple drink run, but one confusing can design turned it into a 20-minute battle of wills. The other day, I stopped off at my local off-license. Depending on where you're from, you might call it a package store, a liquor store, or even, jokingly, something fancy like Sir Reginald's Spirit Emporium. Whatever you call it, it's the place where you grab a bottle, a six-pack, or in my case, something that happened to catch my eye. I was wandering the aisles when I noticed a can with a palm tree on the front. It looked tropical, light, and fun, so I figured why not try it. The drink was called a vodka Ricky, something I'd never had before. I grabbed one along with a few other items, paid at the counter, and went on my way. Back at home, I unpacked my bag and decided to give the new drink a shot. I picked up the can and instantly froze. Instead of the usual aluminum pop top every can in the world seems to have, this one had a plastic contraption covering the top. No pull tab, no familiar silver circle to crack open, just this weird, foreign plastic lid. I thought, okay, maybe it's fancy packaging. There has to be an obvious way in. I turned the can slowly, looking for a sentence somewhere, anything that explained how to open it. Every can has instructions, right? Except this one didn't. All I found were the usual warnings about pregnancy risks. I double-checked that one, had a quick laugh at myself for even reading it, and moved on. Minutes passed. I was scanning every printed word like it was a riddle. After about 5 minutes, I finally spotted it. Tiny letters etched onto the tip of the plastic tab. They read, "Open." That had to be it. I lifted the tab and sure enough, a small section broke open. But instead of the wide mouth I was expecting, there was only a pinhole in the middle of the lid, just big enough to fit a coffee stirrer through. That was it. I thought, surely this can't be right. But I wanted to at least taste it. So I flipped the can upside down and tried to dribble some liquid into a glass. It was like watching molasses pour in slow motion. After 4 full minutes, I barely had 2 inches of liquid at the bottom of my glass. Clearly, this was not the intended method, so I gave up and called in backup. My husband was in the other room, and I asked, "Do you know how to get this thing open?" He came over, looked at it, and said, "Don't you just flip it open?" I showed him the tiny hole and the trickle I'd managed to pour into the glass. He raised an eyebrow, then admitted, "Yeah, that doesn't look like it's working very well." "Really? I hadn't noticed," I shot back, sarcasm dripping from every word. Sarcasm might as well be my second language at this point. He offered to grab a screwdriver and rip the lid off entirely. I told him to go for it. Meanwhile, I pulled out my phone and decided to Google the answer. Surely someone, somewhere, had explained how these weird plastic top cans worked. The first search result told me to unscrew the entire lid. Supposedly, you just twist it off to enjoy the aroma of the beverage. I stared at the can, doubting every word. Still, I tried. Unscrewing an aluminum lid is about as effective as trying to open a locked door with positive thoughts. Nothing happened. I sighed, cursed Google under my breath for wasting my time, and set the can back down. My husband came back, screwdriver in hand, ready to perform surgery on the can. Just before he started prying, he noticed another marking on the lid. Letters that read EXO. That was new. We Googled again, this time searching EXO-kin lid. And finally, the answer popped up. The trick was simple, but completely unintuitive. First, you flip the little plastic tab up. Then, instead of just leaving it there, you slide it backwards. That motion reveals the actual spout. I gave it a try, and sure enough, the can opened properly. 20 minutes of trial, error, and 2 Google searches later, I had access to my vodka Ricky. All of that for a drink I'd expected to crack open in 2 seconds. Standing there, staring at the open can, I couldn't help but laugh. If it takes me that long to figure out a lid, maybe I really have crossed the line into old territory. That's the end of this story. Something so simple turning into a 20-minute puzzle feels almost like a rite of passage. The back and forth with the husband made it even funnier, like a team effort just to crack a can. It's the kind of moment that sticks with you, half embarrassing and half hilarious. This next story is about a teenager who just wanted to go home quietly, only for an aunt to call them out in front of the entire family. I was around 13 when this happened, and I still remember it vividly because of how uncomfortable it made me. My family had gone out to eat at a restaurant, and it wasn't just my immediate family, it was a whole group of relatives. My parents were there, a couple of aunts and uncles, and several cousins. Most of my cousins were already in their 20s, so I was by far the youngest one at the table. At first, everything was fine. We ordered our food, chatted while waiting, and I did my best to keep up with the conversations. But after a couple of hours, my energy started to run out. I've always been more on the introverted side, and sitting around a big table while older relatives laugh and talk about things I couldn't really join in on was exhausting. I felt myself shutting down inside, wishing I could just slip away somewhere quiet. Instead of saying anything directly to everyone, I leaned over to my mom. She was sitting right next to me, and I whispered softly, "When are we going home?" I wasn't trying to complain, and I wasn't trying to sound ungrateful. I just wanted to know if there was an end in sight because my social battery was gone. I kept my voice low on purpose because I didn't want anyone else to hear. The last thing I wanted was for the family to think I didn't appreciate being there, or that I thought they were boring. My mom answered, but not in the way I expected. Instead of whispering back, she said no, in a regular voice, loud enough that people at the table could hear. It wasn't rude or anything, but it wasn't quiet either, and that was enough to catch my aunt's attention. My aunt was sitting across the table, maybe 2 seats to the left, and as soon as she picked up on what my mom said, she turned toward me. She must have figured out what I had asked, because she didn't hesitate to respond. And instead of brushing it off or keeping it private, she spoke up so the whole table could hear. She looked directly at me and said, "No, we're talking. It's not time to go home yet. If being here means that you suffer, then you will have to suffer." I froze. She said it in this sharp, almost scolding tone, and because she said it loudly, every single family member at the table heard her. The conversations around me stopped, and suddenly all I could feel was this heavy silence, like the spotlight was on me. I remember staring down at my plate, my face burning red, and trying to act like nothing had happened. I didn't say a word back. What was I supposed to do? Argue with her in front of 10 other relatives? I didn't want to escalate things. I didn't want to make the evening more awkward than it already was. So I sat there quietly, feeling humiliated. I thought I had been careful by whispering to my mom, but instead it blew up into this public moment where my aunt made it seem like I was being selfish or dramatic. In reality, I was just tired. I'd been sitting there for hours with adults who barely noticed me, and I wanted to go home to my own space. But now, instead of slipping out unnoticed, I had been called out in front of everyone. Nobody said anything after that. None of my cousins jumped in. None of the other adults softened the moment. They all just sat in silence for a few seconds, then slowly picked the conversation back up like nothing had happened. For me, though, the damage was done. I couldn't shake the embarrassment. The rest of the meal felt endless, and I couldn't wait for it to finally be over. That night stuck with me because of how unnecessary it was. I wasn't trying to be rude or disrespectful, and my aunt could have just ignored it, but instead she turned it into this spectacle that made me feel small and singled out. At 13, moments like that cut deep, and the way the table went quiet only made me feel more isolated. I just sat there quietly, staring at my plate, counting the minutes until we left. That's the end of this story. That kind of call out in front of family hits hard, especially at that age. It's tough when you're already the youngest at the table and just trying to keep your head down. The way everyone went silent makes the whole thing stick in your memory even more. It's a perfect example of how small moments can feel huge when you're a kid. This next story is about a young worker who got fired in the middle of the forest over a pothole and decided to follow his boss's orders a little too literally. Back in the late 1980s, I landed what I thought was a dream summer job. I was 19 years old and got hired with the Ministry of Natural Resources to drive vehicles and provide support during forest fire season. For someone my age, it was an amazing opportunity. The pay was more than double minimum wage, the hours were unlimited, and every week brought a new adventure. Fire season started early that year. By mid-May, I found myself assigned to a fire that was already 300 to 400 hectares and still growing. To give you an idea, 1 hectare equals about 2.5 acres. The whole district covered close to 100,000 square kilometers. That's an area roughly the size of Indiana. With fires sparking across the region, there was a ton of driving to do. One particular day, I rolled into the on-site headquarters, expecting my usual assignments. Instead, I was told to hold tight while they figured out a return load for me. After a short wait, they told me to head over to the helicopter staging area and pick up the fire boss, who I'll call FB, and a few others. Now, the roads out there were rough. We weren't talking paved highways. These were bush roads, riddled with potholes, dips, and uneven patches that shook the whole truck if you weren't careful. On the way back from the staging area, I hit one of those deep potholes. The truck jolted, and that was all it took to set FB off. He exploded. I mean, full-on yelling about kids these days and reckless driving and no respect for the job. He bellowed for a solid 5 minutes, scolding me like I'd been tearing through the woods at reckless speeds. The thing is, I had already learned on my way out that you couldn't drive fast on those roads. By the time I picked him up, I was already crawling along at 15 kilometers per hour. That's about 9 miles an hour. But it didn't matter. He was convinced I was some speed demon behind the wheel. When we finally rolled back into base camp, he slammed the truck door open, stormed out, and screamed, "You're fired! Get back to the district and have them process you out." At first I thought he was joking. We were deep in the bush, and back to the district meant a long, long drive. But no, he meant it. So I thought to myself, fine. If 15 kilometers an hour was too fast for him, I'll take it slower. Cue malicious compliance. I grabbed a couple of 20-liter gas cans, tossed them in the truck, and started the long drive back. But this time, I decided I wasn't touching the accelerator. I let the truck idle forward on its own, only pressing the gas on the occasional hill. If 15 kilometers per hour was too much, then the idle speed, about 8 to 10 kilometers an hour, must be perfect. That return trip took me 22 hours. By the time I finally hit pavement, I was exhausted, but also amused. Once I got onto the highway, I kept the cruise control 5 kilometers under the speed limit, just to stay consistent. When I finally reached the district office, I processed out as instructed, and thanks to all those hours on the clock, I ended up earning an extra $300. Not bad for being fired. As I was leaving, I ran into someone I knew. Let's call him CB. He was a crew boss and had actually taught the level 1 forest firefighting course I took before I got hired. We'd always gotten along well. He mentioned that one of his crew members had broken a leg and he was looking to replace them. Since there were only 2 new hires that year and none had joined his crew, he asked if I wanted the spot. I said yes without hesitation. Within 2 hours, I was in his truck, heading out to meet his crew at a fire. And wouldn't you know it, the fire we were sent to a few days later was the exact same one I'd just been fired from. Cue the revenge. It turned out CB and FB were actually close friends. Because of that, our crew was assigned as the initial response team. That meant we rode in helicopters with FB and worked directly under his oversight. For about a week, we were constantly flying in and out of sites with him. And then one day, he finally noticed me. I watched his face change as the recognition hit. He went from pink to red to a deep shade of purple. I'd only ever read descriptions like that in books, but here it was, playing out in front of me in real life. He started yelling into his headset, words I couldn't make out over the noise, but his rage was obvious. CB noticed too and gave me a sideways glance like he was trying not to laugh. Later, CB asked me what that was about, and I told him the whole story, including the part about idling back to the district for 22 hours. He nearly fell over laughing. Apparently, FB had a long history of blowing up over minor things and firing people for no good reason. I wasn't the first. In fact, not long after me, he fired 2 other drivers for the exact same road and pothole. From then on, CB decided to have a little fun. Whenever we were flying with FB, he made sure I was seated right where FB would see me, as soon as he turned around. Later on, when our crew got assigned administrative duties, CB became FB's number 2. He jokingly referred to me as his helper monkey, and made sure I was always in FB's space. The rest of the crew knew the backstory, so there was no tension, just plenty of laughs at FB's expense. I ended up working for CB for 3 more summers while I was in university. They were some of the best summers of my life. I earned good money, stayed in incredible shape, and collected stories that I still laugh about to this day. All of that came from being fired over a pothole at 15 kilometers per hour. That's where the story ends. That's one of those perfect play dumb and win kinds of stories. The slow drive back alone was hilarious, but the part where he had to face you again later made it even better. The best detail is how CB kept putting you right in his line of sight just to mess with him. That's the kind of long-term, subtle revenge that hits way harder than yelling ever could. This next story is about a husband who had to choose between protecting his wife's feelings and keeping the peace when his mom crossed a serious line. I'm 29 and I've been married to my wife for a little while now. She's 30, beautiful, and truly the love of my life. Since our wedding, she's gained some weight, and while I still find her gorgeous, she struggles with insecurity about it. I know how sensitive she feels about her body, so I try to be extra mindful of it and reassure her whenever I can. Recently, my parents bought a house about an hour away from us, and we'd planned to celebrate with a nice dinner at our place. The idea was simple. They'd come over, we'd cook, eat together, and make it a pleasant evening. Nothing fancy, just family time. That evening, my parents arrived earlier than expected. My wife was still in her cooking clothes when they came in. She had on this snug t-shirt, the kind you throw on when you're working around the kitchen. She looked casual and relaxed, but definitely not dressed up yet. The moment my mom saw her, things went south. She walked right up, put her hand on my wife's belly, and asked, "Are you pregnant?" My wife froze for a second, then said no. She added, painfully, that she was just gaining weight. I could see her face crumple as the words left her mouth. That was all I needed to see. I didn't want this to turn into a massive argument or let my wife's evening get ruined any further. So I immediately stepped in. I told my parents that we'd have to reschedule, congratulated them quickly on their new house, and said we'd save them some food. Then I walked them out. After they left, my wife broke down in tears. I held her and did my best to reassure her, telling her she was beautiful and that my mom's comment had been completely out of line. But the damage was already done. What should have been a cozy night turned into something painful for her. A few days later, I met with my parents alone to talk things over. My mom admitted she had made a mistake, but then she turned it back on me. She said I'd taken things too far by asking them to leave. My dad chimed in, saying that by not letting my mom apologize right then, I made them look like jerks in front of my wife. I told them honestly that the only thing I could see happening in that moment was the evening spiraling into something worse. My wife was already hurt, and dragging out an apology in front of her while she was upset wasn't going to fix it. It would have just added more awkwardness to an already raw moment. I suggested that they apologize now instead. At least it would show they recognized the harm and cared enough to try to make it right. But they pushed back on that too. They said that now it would just seem like they were apologizing because I told them to, and that it wouldn't come across as genuine. So here I am, stuck between my parents insisting I handled it wrong and my wife still dealing with the sting of my mom's words. I know I overreacted a bit by cutting the evening short, but I also can't imagine just letting my mom's comment slide and watching my wife sit there in tears while trying to pretend everything was fine. That story ends there. That moment sounds brutal for the wife. And honestly, the husband did what he had to do. Sometimes keeping the peace in the moment just makes things worse. And shutting it down quickly probably saved everyone from a bigger blow-up. The way the parents tried to spin it afterward says a lot about how they see things. It's one of those family situations that doesn't have an easy fix. This next story starts with a wife who's ready to build a family until a hidden past turns every promise on its head. I'm 29 and I've been married to my husband, who's 31, for almost 3 years. From the beginning, I was upfront about wanting kids. I didn't want to rush a wedding just to sprint into parenthood, but I did picture us trying within the first year. After about 5 months of marriage, I brought it up gently. I told him I was excited to start a family and wanted to plan for it, even if the timeline shifted a little. He told me he wasn't ready. I took a breath, swallowed the disappointment, and said we could wait. A year passed. We'd settled into routines, work, chores, little weekend trips, birthdays with our friends, normal life stuff. I brought it up again, this time after dinner when we were calm and relaxed. I said I was still thinking about it, still hoping. He gave me the same answer, not ready. He didn't offer details, just a shrug and a change of subject. I told myself it was better to be aligned than to push him into something he didn't want yet, So I let it go again. By the second year, not ready had started to feel like a wall. I tried to be patient, but to give you an idea of where my head was, I was tracking cycles, reading about prenatal vitamins, and budgeting for baby items without telling him. I was also very consciously not turning this into a daily conversation. I didn't want resentment to become the soundtrack of our marriage. So I waited and reminded myself that we were supposed to be a team. Then earlier this year, we had one of those unplanned, off script nights that just happens. No long talk, no checklist, just closeness. The next morning, he handed me a small pack of pills and said I should take them, just in case. I looked at the packet in my palm and felt my chest tighten. He was still saying not yet, just using different words. I nodded, said okay, and walked to the bathroom. I pretended to take them. I didn't. Looking back on it now, I know that decision sits in a gray zone. I was tired of waiting forever. I wanted to be a mom. A month later, I took a test alone in our bathroom. 2 lines. My hands shook. I felt that swirl of fear and joy that you can't fully describe, like standing at the edge of a cliff and seeing the sunrise at the same time. I told him that evening. He went quiet, not shocked happy, not nervous, excited, just cold. He said almost nothing, and over the next days he turned distant. He avoided baby talk. He avoided me. The emptiness in our house was louder than any argument. I kept asking myself what I'd done wrong. Was he scared about money? About timing? About being a parent at all? The answer arrived a few weeks later, not from a conversation with him, but in the worst possible way, through a thread I pulled when I noticed weird line items in our bank history. They weren't huge, but they repeated. The names didn't match our bills. When I asked, he brushed it off. I looked deeper, and then I found it. My husband has a 5-year-old son from a previous relationship, a real living child he never told me about, not when we were dating, not when we were engaged, not once during our marriage. He'd been financially supporting the child in secret while telling me we were having money struggles. He'd used "not ready" as a blanket to hide a truth that would have changed every conversation we'd had about family. I confronted him, and the room went electric. He admitted it flatly. No tears, no real explanation beyond, "It was complicated, and I didn't want to lose you." He called it part of his past. I stood there with a hand on my stomach, listening to a man I thought I knew tell me a story he should have told me years ago. I felt a kind of silence inside me that I've never felt before, like the part that trusts by default just shut down. After that, every moment replayed with a new filter. When I asked to try after 5 months, he already had a child. When I asked at 1 year, he already had a child. When I asked at 2 years, he already had a child. When he handed me pills and said, "just in case," he already had a child. Not ready wasn't about parenthood in general. It was about a secret he didn't plan to share. I wish I could say we talked it through and found a path forward. But the truth is, trust is the ground you stand on in a marriage. And mine cracked. I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel respected. I filed for divorce. I did it quietly, with a lawyer, with copies of statements and a list of dates, because the practical side of me knew I had to move carefully. That's when a second wave hit. My family told me I was overreacting. They said I should forgive him, that at least he didn't cheat, that it's just a child from before you. They told me love is complicated, that people make mistakes, that I should keep the peace and think of the baby. I listened. I really did. Then I asked myself the only question that mattered. Could I trust him again? I kept circling back to the same picture. Me, pregnant, sitting across from a man who had looked me in the eye again and again and chosen to keep a life-size secret. It wasn't the existence of his child that broke me. It was the years of silence around it, the made-up money stories, the way he let me build plans on information he knew wasn't true. I can handle hard news. I can't build a family on a lie. So I stayed the course. I told my family I loved them, and I heard their worries, but I wasn't stepping back into a house where I'd spend every day wondering what else I didn't know. I chose the quieter path, the one where I can sleep at night, even if the bed is lonelier, because at least I know the ground under me is real. That's where this story finishes. There's a difference between a hard truth and a hidden truth, and this one crossed the line. It's tough to hear family push, move on. when the core issue is trust, not drama. The way the timeline reframed itself is what sticks with me most. Sometimes the only solid path forward is the one that costs the most in the moment. This next story starts with a workplace that never seemed to go right for one employee, and a petty habit that followed the moment a difficult supervisor finally left. When I first started at that company, I remember the small details, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the smell of burnt coffee in the break room, and the constant clack of keyboards. At first it felt like a place I could settle into. I liked the work, and I liked feeling useful. But over time, one person made it hard to enjoy any of it. My supervisor seemed to take an immediate dislike to me. I learned her moods like weather, predictable in the worst way. At meetings, she would sigh in that way that made everyone know she thought you were wasting their time. On calls, she would give curt responses and then send emails that reframed any small mistake into a story about my character. What really hurt, though, was how she handled things behind closed doors. Confidential emails I trusted her with, messages meant to log disputes, document miscommunications, or request guidance, somehow became fodder to read aloud to people beneath her in the company. I remember one winter morning, walking past the stairwell, and hearing the exact wording of a message I'd written being recited like it was gossip. That memory sits weirdly in my chest. When I asked for more hours or nudged a manager about a possible raise, her response became a ritual. She would laugh, openly, and then list 20 reasons I shouldn't expect it. She would bring up mistakes from months ago as if they were evidence the clock could never be turned forward. Mistakes that had been fixed, that I had learned from, became ammunition. It was relentless and humiliating, and it hollowed out the part of me that used to enjoy work. After a while, I began to document things. I saved copies of emails, dates, pieces of performance feedback, small things that could show who I was and how I worked, rather than the version she preferred to show people. I didn't set out to make trouble. I just wanted to preserve the truth. Then, eventually, enough people complained and the company let her go. There was relief, sure. The office atmosphere lightened like a storm breaking. But along with the relief came an unexpected, petty idea. I admit it started almost as a joke. I found myself on a website that asked for a phone number to sign up for local community newsletters. On a whim, I typed in her number. Then later that week, when a charity pop-up asked for SMS contact for updates, I put her digits in again. A few times it felt like a pinch, small paybacks that required little effort. I might sign her up for a church pamphlet distribution, or a neighborhood group that sent constant event notices. Over time, the habit grew. The pattern was simple. Anytime I saw a form or an opt-in, I asked myself if it could land in her messages. At the grocery store, if they offered SMS receipts, sometimes I would use her number instead of mine. When a local organization asked for volunteers and contact info, her number went in the box. I even forwarded a Walmart receipt to her line once, mostly because the idea of her getting a random receipt made me laugh at the time. There are moments I catch myself and think, stop, this is petty, this is dumb. I know it probably crosses lines. I know it could be illegal. The rational part of me bristles at the thought that I'm risking trouble for a private joke. But the memory of confidential messages read aloud and the laughter at my expense gnaws at me. Signing her number up feels like a tiny act of reclaiming dignity, even if it's misguided. When friends hear the story, some laugh and call it creative justice. Others frown and say I should have handled it differently. Formal complaints, HR escalation, legal options. In my head, I know all the better choices. I could have kept better records, pushed for a formal investigation, or quietly applied elsewhere. But this scaled-down revenge lodged in me. It became a small ritual, an outlet that was private and uncomplicated. Whenever life felt unfair, I would scroll, find an opt-in form, and drop her digits in. The thing is, I don't broadcast it. I don't tell coworkers, and I don't post screenshots. It's a quiet thing I do by myself. I know the difference between blowing off steam and crossing a line, and I feel the tension there. I try to be mindful of the consequences, but sometimes the memory of being laughed at in meetings is louder than that mindfulness. It's a bad habit I haven't entirely broken. Some days I tell myself it's time to stop. Other days I can't resist a little notification sent to a number that used to symbolize my humiliation. That story wraps up here. What stands out in this story is the way lingering workplace hostility can shape someone long after the source of the conflict is gone. The betrayal of having confidential emails read aloud publicly leaves a mark that doesn't fade easily. and the laughter in meetings only added to the sense of humiliation. The small acts of revenge described here, signing someone up for unwanted messages, capture how unresolved pain can look for an outlet in ways that feel satisfying in the moment, even if they blur the line between harmless mischief and risky behavior. More than anything, the story highlights how difficult experiences at work can echo beyond the office, influencing choices in unexpected and sometimes self-contradictory ways. This next story is about someone who thought they'd found a loving partner, only to discover their fiancé was secretly trashing their kids online and planning to push them out of the picture. I never thought I'd end up writing something like this, but here we are. Right now, my kids and I are staying with my ex-wife and her husband for a few days while my fiancé moves out of our place. Calling her my fiancé feels strange now, because in my head, she's already my ex. The whole situation feels surreal, like the rug just got yanked out from under me. For some context, I'm 34, transitioned a few years ago, and I had my kids young when I was in the Navy. Their mom and I didn't last, but we've managed to keep a really solid co-parenting relationship. We've both promised ourselves from the start that our kids would never feel pulled between two homes or made to feel like outsiders in either one. They have a great mom, a stepdad who's a genuinely good guy, and me, a dad who's always tried to make sure they feel loved and secure. For a while, I thought they also had a stepmom who cared about them too. I thought I had finally built this big blended family where everyone belonged. I met this woman back in 2020 on a local subreddit. We connected during lockdown when everyone was stuck at home and things just clicked. She had a son, 11 years old, whose dad had passed away when he was just a toddler. Over time, her son started calling me dad, and it felt like this unexpected, beautiful thing. By 2023, we were living together. She told me my daughters, who are now 13 and 10, were her bonus kids. She'd say things like she felt blessed to have them in her life. To my face, it seemed like she was all in on the family we were building. But a few weeks ago, I noticed some strange alerts popping up on her tablet, stuff about daughters being surrogate girlfriends to single dads. It stopped me in my tracks, and I gave in to the temptation to snoop. That's when I discovered her secret Reddit account, and what I read on there made my stomach twist. She was posting in stepmom and stepparent groups, calling my daughters skids. She said they were inappropriate just for hugging me, or kissing me on the cheek before they left for school. She spun innocent moments into disgusting narratives, accusing them of flaunting themselves just because they wanted affection from their dad. She ranted about how single moms manipulate their kids into wanting their parents back together, and how stepkids are nothing but brats. It was cruel, it was misogynistic, and it was aimed directly at my girls. When I confronted her online through an account I made, she dismissed me with, "You must be a single mom, lol," and reported me to the mods. She didn't realize it was me at first. I gathered screenshots, proof it was her, everything I needed, and the deeper I dug, the worse it got. She admitted in her post that she couldn't stand my kids because they reminded her of my ex. She called them pigs. She mocked my oldest for using baby talk, even though my daughter has a severe speech impediment she's been in therapy for. She even bragged that she lied to me about migraines just to avoid spending time with her. Then there were the future plans she was laying out, saying that once we were married, she'd make sure my girls couldn't talk to their mom without her supervision. She wrote that she wouldn't let me spend our money on my daughters without her approval, and that once they turned 18, they'd be out of the house no matter what. The life she was describing online didn't match the woman I thought I knew at all. To my face, she was kind, supportive, understanding. But in secret, she was plotting to push my children out of our lives. It wasn't just ugly words either. She hasn't worked since she moved in after being laid off. While I thought we were a team, she was spending her time venting online, blaming my kids for her problems, and turning strangers into her personal cheerleaders. Reading it all felt like being punched in the chest over and over. When I finally confronted her in real life, she tried to backpedal. She told me she didn't mean any of it, that she just got caught up in the community. But when I told her I had directly interacted with her online, she didn't have an answer. She just stared at me. Then she tried to guilt me, saying I was breaking her son's heart and reminding me how she'd stood by me through my transition when other people walked away. And yeah, that part stung. Her son has already lost one dad, and now I'm leaving too. But at the end of the day, I can't sacrifice my daughters for this relationship. I promised myself years ago I would never let them feel unwanted, unloved, or unsafe in their own home. And that's exactly what she was planning to do. So I told her the truth. She needs to be out by the second week of October. I'm mourning what I thought we had, but it turns out it was never real. She lied to me, to my face, day after day. I'd rather be a good parent than a partner to someone who secretly despises my kids. Kate, if you ever read this, enjoy your life, but don't date a parent if you can't handle the fact that their kids come first. That's where the story ends. Man, that's a brutal one. It's already tough enough to blend families, but finding out someone is two-faced like that hits on a whole different level. I can't even imagine stumbling across an account where your own partner is mocking your kids behind your back. The choice to walk away makes total sense though. Nothing's more important than making sure your kids feel safe and loved. And honestly, I feel like the audience probably agrees with me here. Kids first, always. This next story is about a teenager who never wanted his last name changed, but his mom and stepdad forced it anyway. And now that he's almost 18, he's planning to take his name back. I'm 17 now, with less than a year until I turn 18, and I've already decided exactly what I'm going to do the moment I legally can. I'm changing my last name back to the one I had before my mom remarried. The story behind all of this goes way back, and to understand why it matters so much to me, I've got to start with my dad. To put it bluntly, my father was not a good person. Honestly, he was a piece of work in the worst way. Even his own family admits it. His parents, his siblings, his cousins, everyone agrees he was not someone worth looking up to. When he passed away, I didn't feel sadness. There wasn't really any loss there for me. But here's the thing. His family, my grandparents especially, were amazing. They were the ones who showed up for me and my little sister, who's 3 years younger than me. They took us in after my dad died, letting us live with them for a couple of months, while my mom tried to get her life together. They babysat us constantly, helped out after school, and just made sure we were cared for. So, while my dad himself wasn't worth much, his family was everything. My last name was tied to them. My grandparents. The people who stepped up when we needed it most. That name felt like home. 2 years after my dad passed, my mom remarried. She married my stepdad, and at first things seemed fine. But then came the bombshell. She decided she wanted my sister and me to take his last name. She said it would bring us all together as a family. She said it would spare us the negative association with my father. I remember being just a little kid, probably around 7, and telling her I didn't want to. I liked having the same name as my grandparents. It made me feel connected to them, but my mom brushed it off. She told me it would hurt my stepdad's feelings if I refused. When I asked him directly, he said he didn't understand why I'd want to keep the last name of someone like my dad. He even offered to adopt me, like that would solve everything. I told him no, because it wasn't about my father, it was about my grandparents. He didn't like that answer. He shut the whole conversation down and told me flat out that I was a kid, and it was going to happen whether I liked it or not. I'll never forget the day I came home from school, and my mom greeted me with this big smile. She was practically cheering, telling me we all had the same last name now. She acted like it was some happy milestone, like a birthday or holiday. She explained that from then on, people at school, at the doctor's office, everywhere, they'd all be calling me by my new last name. I remember feeling this pit in my stomach. I thought maybe I could still choose. Maybe people would still call me what I wanted if I just told them. But as a little kid, I learned quickly that you don't get that choice with last names. Teachers, officials, doctors, they used whatever was on the paperwork. It was frustrating. Eventually, I worked out a sort of compromise with my teachers. Officially, on assignments and in conferences, I was stuck with a new name. But casually, they let me keep using my original one. My friends never stopped calling me by the old name either, which drove my mom and stepdad crazy. They'd correct people constantly, even correcting their own friends when someone used the name I preferred. It became this whole battle. When my sister got old enough to start school, she followed my lead. She used the old last name casually too. That made my mom and stepdad furious. They insisted she was just copying me, that she was too young to even remember the change or care about it. But it didn't matter. She felt the same way. And so it became this quiet rebellion. For years, we lived under the name they chose for us on paper, while holding on to our real name in our hearts and in private. Now, with my 18th birthday coming up, I've already told my grandparents I plan to change it back legally. They've supported me 100%. They said they'd help with paperwork and costs if that's what I want. And it absolutely is. The problem is that about a month ago, my mom found out. She told my stepdad, and both of them flipped out. They accused me of disrespecting the family. They said I was being a bad influence on my sister because she's only copying me in all of this. My stepdad told me I was treating him like garbage, that I was erasing everything he's done for me. He told me that he always saw me as his son, and if I went back to my old name, he'd stop trying to be a father figure. He said I'm supposed to be the one to carry his name into the next generation, and if I don't, then his line ends with him. I told him straight up that it was never about my father. I told him they forced this name change on me as a kid, and they can't force me to keep it as an adult. I explained that my last name connects me to my grandparents, to the people who have shown me unconditional love my whole life. That's what I want to honor. But instead of hearing me, he doubled down. He said he's done everything my grandparents have and more. And if I really feel this way, then he wasted his time and money. He admitted he's always felt like I resented him, and I was honest. I told him I did resent him because of how he handled the name situation and how he acted weird whenever I wanted to stay close to my extended family. I told him his behavior only made me push back harder. His response was that he should have been enough for me, that I should have accepted the family he was offering and let go of the one I already had. My mom backed him up, saying I'm being juvenile and stubborn. She said at the very least I should respect them enough to use my actual name while it's still legally mine. But honestly, that name doesn't feel like mine, no matter what the paperwork says. So yeah, that's where things stand. I've made up my mind, but I can't shake the guilt they keep piling on me. They're making it sound like I'm destroying this family, when in reality, I'm just trying to hold on to the one that's always been there for me. That story wraps up here. That's a heavy one, honestly. Names carry so much more weight than people realize. It's not just a word on paper, it's about identity and connection. I get why the stepdad feels hurt, but man, forcing that choice on a kid was never the right move. It makes sense that the bond with the grandparents feels stronger, because they were there through everything. I'd be curious to hear what people think. Is this stubborn or just holding on to what really matters? Either way, I respect the determination. This next story is about a man who caught his pregnant fiancée receiving explicit pictures from another guy, and now he's being pressured by both families to forgive her, even though he can't move past the betrayal. I've been with my fiancée for about 3 years now, and up until recently, I thought we had this rock-solid relationship. We met in the summer of 2022 at a hiking group meetup, and right away we clicked. What made it even crazier was that we realized we were from the same small hometown. That little coincidence kind of bonded us instantly, and from there, things just kept moving forward. By Christmas that year, we were serious enough that we went home together and introduced each other to our families. That introduction snowballed into something I never expected. Our families didn't just get along, they became really close. My dad and her stepdad started golfing together, hunting together, even going on fishing trips. My mom, my sister, and her mom ended up joining the same book club. Pretty soon, it felt like the two families had just blended seamlessly. It wasn't just me and her anymore. It was like we had this huge, extended support system built around us. Fast forward to last August. She's a teacher, and she got an offer for a position back in our hometown. It seemed perfect, like everything was lining up. She took the job while I still had a contract I needed to finish up. By February, I wrapped up my contract, moved back home, and everything seemed like it was falling into place. Shortly after, I proposed, and we got engaged. Then in April, we found out she was pregnant. By May, we were announcing the pregnancy to everyone, and the whole family, both sides, was ecstatic. It really felt like we were building this future that everyone around us was invested in. But about 2 months ago, everything shifted. I just worked an 18-hour shift in healthcare. My phone had died, and when I got home, I noticed her phone sitting on the table. We've always had each other's passwords, and we both use each other's phones if one of ours is dead, so I didn't think twice. I picked it up just to mess around with a game before passing out in bed. That's when I saw it. A notification popped up, a text from one of the guys in our hiking group, and it wasn't some casual message. It was a straight-up nude. My stomach dropped instantly. I opened their conversation, and as I scrolled back, my hands started shaking. Since May, this guy had been texting her constantly. It started off harmless, just friendly chatting. Then it turned into light flirting, then heavier flirting. And eventually, I was staring at full-on explicit pictures from him and encouragement from her. I don't even know how to explain the feeling. Anger, disgust, betrayal, all of it hit me at once. I couldn't even bring myself to sleep next to her. I just went into the guest room, shut the door, and lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering how the person I trusted most could do this. The next day, I confronted her. She broke down immediately. She apologized, said she would never do it again, that she'd block him right then and there, and that she would do whatever I asked. I told her straight up, I needed a paternity test. I wasn't going to live with this gnawing question in the back of my mind. To her credit, she didn't hesitate. She agreed immediately, paid for a non-invasive prenatal paternity test, even paid extra to rush the results. When they came back, the child was mine. So now I know the baby is mine. But that doesn't erase what she did. She keeps saying she's willing to do whatever it takes. But I can't shake the disgust. Every time I look at her, I think about those messages. About how, while I was working insane hours, she was getting validation from some other guy. It makes my skin crawl. And of course, both of our families are pushing hard for us to stay together. They're so intertwined now. It's like my decision isn't just about me anymore. My dad and her stepdad are practically best friends. Our moms do everything together. Everyone keeps saying it would be easier for the families if I just forgave her, if I could find a way to move on. But I don't care about making everyone else's life easier. The only person I care about in this whole situation is my kid. What I don't want is for my child to grow up in a house where the relationship between the parents is toxic. And that's exactly what I feel right now. Toxicity. She's upset because I haven't touched her in 2 months. She's stressed because she doesn't know what our long-term future looks like anymore. She pleads with me to stay, but every time she does, I just feel more certain that what we actually need to do is co-parent. I'm not yelling, I'm not causing drama. I'm just done. The trust is broken, and no matter what she says, I can't see a way to rebuild it. Maybe that makes me the bad guy in some people's eyes, but for me, the priority is making sure my kid grows up healthy, loved, and not surrounded by resentment. So now I'm sitting here, weighing everything. On one hand, there's the family pressure, the life we planned, the baby that's on the way. On the other hand, there's the betrayal I can't unsee, and the gnawing feeling that I'll never look at her the same way again. Maybe she wants forgiveness to make it easier for everyone, but I can't give it, and I don't think I should. That's the end of this story. That's a tough one. Honestly, once trust is shattered like that, it's almost impossible to rebuild, especially with a baby on the way and all that stress piled on top. It feels like everyone else is looking at the families and the convenience of staying together, while he's the only one focused on what environment the kid will actually grow up in. And I get it. You can't just flip a switch and erase betrayal. Forgiveness isn't about making things easier for everyone else. Sometimes the healthiest choice is the one that hurts the most. This next story is about a woman whose mother-in-law completely blew up at her during a birthday party, and now she's being told she should apologize, even though she doesn't feel like she did anything wrong. I'm 30, my husband is 32, and we've been together for 7 years. Recently, his dad turned 60, a huge milestone, and at the beginning of the year, we'd actually planned to throw him a big celebration. We wanted it to be special. When we told my husband's mom, she was on board at first, but then she shifted gears. Instead of a party, she wanted us to buy his dad a car. She told us she would handle throwing the party herself, and that we should focus on the car. We agreed, even though buying a car was a lot. But fast forward to the actual week of his birthday. On Monday, just a few days before the celebration, my mother-in-law messaged us saying she didn't actually have the money to host a party after all, but we should still go ahead with buying the car. The timing couldn't have been worse. About 2 months earlier, we'd lost a major client, so money had been tight. My husband wasn't happy with any of the cars we could afford at the time, and he'd rather save up and surprise his dad later when we could buy something nicer. I felt bad though. I didn't want the day to go uncelebrated, so I convinced my husband we should still host something at our house. It wasn't the huge party we originally envisioned, but it was still a warm, intimate gathering. Close friends, close family, good food, and a chance to celebrate his dad's big milestone. The night of the party, things were going well. At one point, we were streaming video birthday messages for his dad in the living room. I stepped out to grab the gift from our bedroom, but when I got closer, I realized the bedroom door was open. That instantly felt wrong, because I knew I had closed it earlier. I pushed the door open and found a woman inside my bedroom, someone I had never even seen before. I was shocked. Who just walks into a closed bedroom at someone else's house? I asked her to leave immediately, and she did, but I couldn't shake how uneasy it made me. This wasn't some kid wandering around. It was a grown woman snooping in my private space. Upset, I told my husband, and I also mentioned it to my own mom, who was at the party. Not long after, my mother-in-law came over and noticed I looked unsettled. She asked what was wrong, so I explained what had happened. That's when I found out the woman had been her relative. Instead of apologizing or acknowledging how inappropriate it was, she brushed it off. She basically said, "Oh well, it happened. I don't even know her that well." That made me even more frustrated. Why would you invite someone you don't even know personally to a party at my house? Especially when we had made it clear that this gathering was only for close friends and family. It was meant to be small and personal. But instead of taking responsibility, my mother-in-law took offense. She raised her voice, yelling in my face about how she'd never invite her family to my house again. I tried to calm things down, reminding her we were in the kitchen, right near my daughter's room, just a few meters away, and that she needed to lower her voice so my little one could sleep. That only escalated things. She started screaming louder, insisting I was disrespectful, and that because she was mum, I had no right to tell her how to speak. She jabbed her finger at me over and over. I finally snapped and pointed back at her, telling her to stop and to leave. At that point, she switched targets. She turned on my sister-in-law, yelling at her for packing things up the wrong way. I stepped in again, telling her she needed to stop and leave the kitchen. That was the final straw. She lost it completely, screaming that I had no right to tell her how to talk to her own child. I stood my ground. I told her, just like she's sister-in-law's mother, I'm my daughter's mother. And right then, my daughter needed peace and quiet to sleep, not a screaming match echoing down the hall. I told her she was yelling in my house, in my kitchen, and she needed to leave. She didn't take that well. She got up in my face, clapping her hands inches from me, swearing, pointing, screaming. Eventually, she stormed out, still fuming. Later, she vented to my mom about it. And here's where it gets complicated. My mom told me I should apologize, not for standing up to my mother-in-law, but for the way I did it. She thinks it was rude that I pointed back at my mother-in-law and told her to get out. According to her, that was disrespectful, especially since she's my elder and my mother-in-law. But here's the thing. I grew up in a traditional society where elders believe they can say or do anything without being questioned, even when they're wrong. That's just the culture. But that's not how I was raised personally. My parents taught me that respect goes both ways, and that being older doesn't mean you can scream in someone's face in their own home without consequence. So now I'm torn. On one hand, I know my mom is just trying to keep the peace. On the other hand, I don't feel like I did anything wrong. I asked her politely to lower her voice for my daughter's sake, and when she kept screaming and swearing in my face, I told her to leave my kitchen. To me, that feels fair. But my mom says an apology is necessary just to smooth things over. The truth is, I don't want to apologize. I don't think I should have to. If anything, I think my mother-in-law should be the one apologizing for how she treated me in my own home. But I'm left wondering, am I really wrong here? That's the end of the story. That one's messy. It feels like the mother-in-law came in ready to control the whole situation, and then lost it when she was told no, in someone else's house. Honestly, pointing a finger back after she'd already been doing it doesn't seem like some huge crime. It's wild how quick people are to demand the younger person apologize just for standing their ground. This next story is about someone at work who tried to fix a data problem with SQL, but one wrong command nearly destroyed everything. Back at one of my old jobs, I was the person finance relied on whenever sales numbers didn't add up at the end of the month. Our retail stores had closing managers who sometimes entered things wrong, typos, missed digits, or just flat-out mistakes. My role was to clean all that up with SQL queries, so the final reports matched the deposits. Over time, I developed a careful routine: gather the individual transactions, summarize them, dump everything into a temporary table, and let finance check it before I moved anything into the production table. Once the temp data was verified, I'd compare it side by side with production to make sure what was already correct stayed untouched and what was broken finally got fixed. That rhythm kept things reliable, and for a while it worked without fail. On this particular day, though, I noticed something off in the data. Nothing unusual. I dealt with hiccups all the time. My plan was to tweak a bit of logic and rerun the query, but for some reason, I chose the worst possible way to do it. Instead of using the delete statement I already had built into the query, I decided to manually type one out. It sounds small, but that tiny decision set off a chain reaction. In my rush, I mistyped the target and wrote the name of the production table instead of the temp table. By the time I realized what I'd done, my mouse was already clicking execute. It was one of those horrifying moments where your brain screams stop, but your finger has already finished the job. The production table disappeared in an instant. My body reacted before my brain did. I went cold, then immediately broke into a sweat, like someone had turned the thermostat up 20 degrees. I stared at the screen with that sinking feeling in my chest, replaying what I'd just done. Panic set in hard. For about 10 minutes I couldn't think straight. Then, right on cue, the phone rang. Someone from finance was on the line saying, "Hey, something's really wrong with the sales data." I already knew exactly what they were seeing. A big, empty void where hundreds of thousands of rows should have been. The obvious move would have been to tell my boss and have IT pull the latest backup. But admitting I had wiped the production table with one careless command, that was a conversation I wanted to avoid at all costs. So I forced myself to slow down, breathe, and look for another way. I realized the production table wasn't magic. It had been built from other raw transaction tables in the system. If I could retrace the steps and rebuild the logic carefully, I might be able to put it back together without anyone knowing. For the next 4 hours, I worked nonstop. I wrote a new query to reconstruct the table from scratch, pulling the transactions, rebuilding the aggregation, and testing each version of the output as I went. Every time I found a mismatch, I rewrote sections and checked again. I dealt with null values that threw off totals, tricky grouping errors, and edge cases that made no sense at first glance. It was exhausting, but slowly the pieces began to line up. Finally, I had a rebuilt version of the table that matched the numbers finance expected. I sent it off for validation, and when they confirmed everything looked good, I felt like I could breathe for the first time all day. In the end, nobody ever found out. My boss never questioned me, my coworkers never suspected, and finance thought I had just been working on a bigger than usual discrepancy. To them, I was fixing a problem. To me, it was the time I nearly blew up production and somehow managed to stitch it back together before anyone realized. Even now, I still remember that "oh no" moment like it happened in slow motion, and I've never looked at a delete statement the same way since. That's the end of this story. It's wild how one tiny mistake, just a word typed in the wrong place, can snowball into a near disaster. What stands out here is how much sheer focus it took to claw things back without anyone noticing. Honestly, it shows that sometimes the scariest lessons don't come from being caught, but from knowing how close you were to complete failure. The pressure must have been brutal, but at least it turned into a story worth telling. This next story is about someone who thought they were just helping out with a routine work interview, only to discover that the candidate walking through the door was none other than the person who made their high school years miserable. Earlier this week, I was scheduled to sit in on a series of interviews for a new role on our team. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary for me. I've been in this company for a good while now, settled into a mid-level management role where part of the responsibility is weighing in on new hires. Usually it's pretty straightforward. Show up, smile, listen, take notes, share my perspective afterward, and move on. But this time, things didn't turn out to be routine at all. When the interview calendar first landed in my inbox, I skimmed through the names without much thought. That's when one of them caught my eye, Jake. At first I brushed it off. It's not an uncommon name, and it had been more than 15 years since high school. But as soon as I saw his last name attached, I felt this sinking sensation in my chest. It couldn't be, right? The odds seemed too slim. Still, a part of me braced for the possibility. The moment he walked into the room, that faint hope I had disappeared. It was him. All the memories I thought I'd buried deep down came rushing back, as sharp and raw as if no time had passed at all. In high school, Jake had been that guy, captain of the football team, effortlessly popular, charming to the teachers, and admired by classmates. He had that kind of charisma that made people gravitate toward him. But for me, he was the nightmare that never left me alone. I was the awkward theater kid, the one who loved scripts, rehearsals, and staying out of the spotlight anywhere else. Jake and his friends made sure I was reminded daily that I didn't fit in. The jokes, the pranks, the casual cruelty that always seemed to be brushed off as just messing around. It wasn't just teasing. It was years of feeling like I didn't belong, years of being reminded I was less than, and Jake had been at the center of it all. Seeing him walk into my professional world after all these years was like being yanked back into those hallways. My heart raced in a way I couldn't control. Here I was, grown, successful in my career, living a life I'd built with my own effort, and yet the sight of him made me feel 17 again, awkward, small, and angry. At first, though, Jake didn't even recognize me. He had that same smug confidence, the same polished grin he must have used 1,000 times before. He played it off like we were old pals catching up. "Hey, remember me from school? Haha, good times." His voice carried that exaggerated friendliness that people put on when they don't really care but think it'll grease the wheels. I kept my face neutral, forced a polite smile, and said something non-committal. Professionally, I had no choice but to keep things above board, but inside, I was battling every instinct not to call him out then and there. Good times? For him, maybe. For me, those years had been anything but. The interview went on, and on the surface, it was fine. He answered the questions, though not always with much depth. His confidence bled into pushiness at times, the kind of energy where it felt like he was trying to sell himself more on charm than on actual skill. I noticed the way he leaned back in his chair, almost too relaxed, as if this was a formality and not something he had to take seriously. At one point, he even leaned forward, grinned, and said, half-jokingly, "You'll get me the job, right?" I laughed politely, but inside I was stunned. That was exactly the kind of entitled assumption he'd always had, that things would fall into his lap because people liked him, that the rules bent for him, that others would make room for him while he coasted. For a moment, it was like being right back in that cafeteria where he'd cut to the front of the line, or that classroom where he'd crack jokes at my expense while everyone else laughed. Except this time, he wasn't the one in charge of the room. When the interview wrapped up, I shook his hand, thanked him, and watched him leave. As the door closed, I finally let myself breathe. The room felt different once he was gone. Lighter somehow. But my chest was still tight, because even though the interview was over, the storm inside me wasn't. Later, when it came time to finalize my notes and review his performance, I didn't sugarcoat a thing. I stayed fair, because that's what the process demands. But I didn't give him an inch of special treatment. I wrote down exactly what I saw. His tendency to be pushy, the lack of substance in some of his answers, and yes, I even included the awkward moment where he tried to lean on our shared history, as if that should buy him goodwill. It wasn't bitterness guiding my hand. It was honesty. If he hadn't been for my past, I'd have written the same notes about any candidate who carried themselves that way. Still, I won't deny that there was a certain satisfaction in knowing that my teenage tormentor wasn't going to charm his way into this role. Not on my watch. For once, the balance had shifted. I wasn't the kid in the back row anymore. I was the one holding the clipboard, the one with a say in his future, the one who didn't have to bend under his confidence anymore. But alongside that satisfaction was discomfort, because as much as I wanted to think I'd left all of that behind, seeing him made me realize how deeply those old wounds still ran. 15 years had passed. I'd built a career, carved out a life, grown into someone stronger and more capable. And yet, for that one interview, I was pulled back into a version of myself I thought I'd outgrown. It's strange, isn't it, how certain people can still hold that kind of power over us, even when they don't mean to, even when they've long since stopped thinking about it. The interview ended, the decision was made, and Jake didn't get the job. Professionally, it was all very clean. Personally, though, I was left turning it over in my head for days. Maybe it was closure, in a strange way, or maybe it was just a reminder that the past doesn't always stay in the past, no matter how much time goes by. That's the end of the story. It's kind of wild how someone you haven't seen in over a decade can still have that kind of impact. It's not even about holding a grudge. It's more about realizing that certain scars don't just fade when you grow up. Honestly, it sounds like keeping things fair and professional while also being truthful was the perfect balance. Sometimes that's the only real way to move forward. This next story is about someone who develops a crush on their neighbor in the dorms, but feels stuck trying to figure out if it could turn into something real. Living in the dorms at a small liberal arts college has always come with a strange mix of privacy and community. On one hand, you're surrounded by classmates and familiar faces at almost every turn. On the other, you're still strangers, each of you carving out little bubbles of independence behind thin walls and locked doors. For me, being a senior now, I had thought I'd seen it all, that the rhythms of dorm life were predictable by this point. But this year, something unexpected happened. I developed a crush on the guy who lives directly across the hall. From the very first week of the semester, I noticed him. He's tall, with the kind of presence that makes you aware of him even before you get a good look. Handsome in that natural, unforced way. The kind that doesn't need attention but somehow gets it anyway. What really drew me in, though, wasn't just him, but the sound of his cat. She has this distinct meow, loud enough to echo through the hallway whenever he leaves her alone. It's almost like her way of demanding the whole building acknowledge her existence. At first, it was just a quirky background detail of my days, but quickly it became the excuse I needed to reach out to him. One evening, after going back and forth in my head about whether it would seem weird or forward, I sat down with a simple card. I wrote a short note introducing myself, nothing over the top, just my name, my major, and a friendly hello. It felt safer than knocking on his door unannounced. I slid it under his door and then waited, nervous but hopeful. To my surprise, the very next day, he slipped a reply back to me. It was straightforward, polite, and even included the cat's name because I had asked. That was it. No long conversation, no immediate spark of friendship, but still, it was a start. For weeks, that was as far as things went. We would occasionally cross paths in the hallway, exchange a nod or a smile, but never much more than that. Still, my crush only grew. Every time I heard the cat meowing, I caught myself smiling, thinking about him. Then, during a grocery run, I had an idea. I walked down the pet aisle and spotted a bag of cat treats, the exact kind my cats at home loved. Even though my own pets were in another state and not allowed in the dorms, I thought, why not? Maybe it would be a small, thoughtful gesture, and maybe it would finally lead to a real conversation. So when I got back to campus, I left the bag by his door. No note, no explanation, just the treats. I ducked back into my room and tried not to overthink it. Hours later, there was a knock at my door. It was him, holding the bag with a smile, thanking me for the gift. He even invited me in to meet his cat. She really was gorgeous. Soft fur, wide eyes, and a personality that matched the meows I'd heard echoing through the hall. We chatted briefly, nothing too deep, but enough for me to feel like the ice was finally broken. The problem is, I still didn't know how to go from that small interaction to something bigger. I didn't know if he was single, or if he had a girlfriend, or if he'd even be interested in me at all. My crush was strong, but my uncertainty was stronger. I didn't want to push too hard, and I didn't want to make things awkward, especially with us living across the hall from each other. I decided I couldn't just sit and wait. I hadn't run into him in person again, so I went back to the method that had worked before, writing a note. This time, it was longer. I thanked him for letting me meet his cat, mentioned again how lovely she was, and then asked if he'd like to grab a coffee with me, or maybe go for a walk. Living in New England in the fall, the world outside looks like it's been painted. Orange and gold leaves everywhere, the kind that crunch under your shoes with every step. A walk seemed like an easy, low-pressure way to talk. I slipped the note under his door, just like the first time, and added my phone number at the bottom. Then I waited. At the time I'm telling this, it's only been about 5 hours since I sent it, so there's no response yet. Maybe he'll text, maybe he won't. I keep checking my phone, heart skipping every time it lights up, hoping it's him. I'm nervous, of course. Part of me worries that I might have read into things too much, that he might not be interested at all, or that he could already be seeing someone. But another part of me knows that if I didn't try, I'd regret it. Even if nothing comes of it, At least I'll know I put myself out there. And honestly, that feels like a small victory in itself. That's where this story ends. Man, I can feel that mix of nerves and excitement just from hearing it. There's something so real about taking a small chance like that, even if it's scary. Sometimes the simplest gestures, like a bag of cat treats or a handwritten note, can say a lot more than people realize. It's cool to see someone actually pushing through that hesitation because those are the moments that stick with you. And whether it works out or not, at least they'll know they went for it. This next story is about a family gathering where someone managed to shut down their bullying uncle without saying a single word. Growing up, I never really enjoyed spending time around my uncle. He wasn't a kind man, and honestly, he had a reputation in our family for being rough in all the wrong ways. He had this idea that boys, and sometimes even girls, needed to be toughened up, and his way of doing that was through constant roughhousing. He loved play punching, but there was nothing playful about it. He'd hit kids in the arm hard enough to make them flinch, then laugh it off as if it was some kind of bonding experience. It wasn't. It was just bullying disguised as a joke. And unfortunately, his own grandsons, two sweet, mild-tempered kids, grew up with him doing the same thing to them. To this day, I've never once heard anyone in the family say they miss him since he passed away. And that probably tells you everything you need to know. By the time I was in my early 20s, about 24 or so, I had gotten very good at avoiding him. At family gatherings, I'd quietly steer clear because I just didn't see the point in engaging. He was loud, overbearing, and quick to make fun of people. I'm the opposite. I've always been quiet, the kind of person who tries to blend in rather than stand out, especially in my family. They're a loud bunch, full of opinions, arguments, and the kind of constant bickering that makes my skin crawl. I hate raised voices, I hate unnecessary conflict, and I don't like to argue. My way of surviving family events was simple: keep my head down, stay out of the fray, and let the storm pass. On top of that, I had been a pacifist since I was about 16. I never made it my entire identity, but it was, and still is, a personal standard I hold myself to. Most people who know me probably wouldn't even be aware of it unless it came up naturally in conversation. I don't preach it, I don't announce it, I don't try to make anyone else live the same way. It's just my thing, my own line in the sand about how I treat others. So imagine me, the quiet one who avoids confrontation, suddenly finding myself seated directly next to my mean uncle at a family Christmas gathering. We had recently moved our annual Christmas dinner from someone's house to a restaurant, which, in hindsight, was one of the best things we could have done. When you're out in public, people tend to behave a little better. It creates a sort of built-in restraint, because no one wants to cause a scene in front of strangers. Even so, I knew sitting beside him wasn't going to be pleasant. He and I had nothing in common, and even just making small talk with him was a stretch. At some point during dinner, with no provocation at all, he decided the best way to interact with me was to ball up his fist and punch me in the arm. Not a playful tap, not a little nudge. A full-on punch, the same way he always did with kids in the family, as if pain was the only way he knew how to connect with people. For a split second, I was stunned. I couldn't believe he had actually done it to me. A grown woman sitting in a restaurant, minding my own business, but instead of raising my voice, instead of snapping at him, I did something else. Something that surprised even me. I glanced down at his fist, still resting against my arm. Slowly, I lifted my eyes back up to him. I let my gaze linger, not angry, not amused, just calm, cold, and unflinching. Then I looked down at his fist again, as if to silently ask, "Really? This is what you're doing?" And then, without saying a single word, I turned my head away and resumed my conversation with the family member on my other side, as though he wasn't even worth addressing. The silence that followed was almost palpable. He froze. His face shifted from smug to unsettled, and in that moment, something cracked in his confidence. The rest of the table didn't even notice what had happened. They were too busy with their food and their own conversations. The only person who caught the whole thing was my mother, sitting across from us, and even she didn't say a word. But I saw it in her eyes later. She loved that I had managed to put him in his place without making a scene. For the rest of the night, my uncle barely said a word to anyone. The man who was usually loud, brash, and always in the middle of the conversation suddenly seemed small. It was as though my silent response had cut deeper than any words could have. He wasn't embarrassed in front of the whole family, but in that private, quiet exchange, he knew he had been called out, and he never recovered from it. After that night, he never touched me again. No more punches, no more attempts to roughhouse or bully me into acknowledging him. In fact, he went out of his way to avoid me at gatherings. If I walked into a room, he would find a reason to step out. If we ended up near each other, he'd shift his attention elsewhere. It was like he couldn't bear the memory of being shut down so thoroughly without me ever raising my voice. For a man whose whole personality revolved around dominating people, that tiny, wordless moment was enough to keep him away from me for the rest of his life. It wasn't planned. I didn't strategize it. But looking back now, it was the most powerful response I could have given him. No yelling, no drama, just a look that made it clear I wasn't going to play his game. And in the end, that was enough to change everything between us. That's where this story finishes. It's kind of wild how much power a simple look can have when the timing is right. Sometimes you don't need to yell, argue, or prove yourself. Just refusing to play along is enough to completely shift the balance. In this case, it sounds like the uncle had built his whole persona around people reacting to him. The second someone didn't, he lost all control. Honestly, it's impressive how much impact that quiet reaction had. This next story is about a bride who finally had enough of her sister-in-law's lies and decided to shut her down during her own wedding celebration. Family drama has always been a complicated thread in my life, and if I'm being honest, my brother and I were never especially close to begin with. We're only a few years apart in age, but our personalities have always clashed. Things only got worse when he started dating the woman who eventually became my sister-in-law. From the very beginning, something about her rubbed me the wrong way. I met her when they were still teenagers, and I couldn't put my finger on it at first. It was just an uneasy feeling that grew stronger over the years. By the time they were in their 20s, they already had 2 kids together and were planning a wedding. The problem was that they wanted this extravagant, picture-perfect event, but they didn't have the money to make it happen. Instead of scaling back, they leaned on everyone else. My parents, my grandparents, and even her parents all pitched in to give her the big day she wanted. We're talking catered food for over 100 people, a decorated venue, fresh flowers, the whole 9 yards. She had her dream wedding, funded entirely by other people's pockets. A few months before their wedding, she asked me to be a bridesmaid, something that surprised me, since she knew I didn't care much for her or my brother. On top of that, she wanted my 4-year-old daughter to be the flower girl. Of course, the honor came with strings attached. Even though she wasn't paying for her own wedding, she still made me pay for both my dress and my daughter's. She picked out this hideous Barney purple gown from a chain bridal store, and I shelled out more than $250 for it. The dresses got shipped to her mom, who insisted on holding on to all of them until the wedding. Then came the first real blow. 2 weeks before the wedding, I got a message from her out of nowhere. She told me, flat out, that everyone in my family disapproved of me attending, and that it would be best if I didn't show up. She even wrote the words, "I think it's best if you don't come." But, and this is the kicker, she still wanted my daughter to be there as the flower girl. That should have been the red flag, right? But at the time, my relationship with my family was already rocky. I had gone through some really hard years in my late teens, struggled, gotten clean, and rebuilt myself. But even after more than 5 years sober, a lot of my relatives still looked at me with judgment. They never fully forgave or forgot those difficult years. So when she told me they didn't want me at the wedding, I believed her. I agreed not to go, but I still let my parents take my daughter because she had been so excited to be part of it. I didn't explain the whole situation to them, and when they didn't ask why I wasn't going, that only reinforced my belief that my sister-in-law had been telling the truth. Later, though, the truth came crashing down. After the wedding, I started getting flooded with angry messages from family members. People said I had been selfish for backing out at the last minute, that I hurt my brother and his fiancée deeply, and that I embarrassed the family after they all chipped in money. I was blindsided. I hadn't backed out. I had been told not to come. But it turned out my sister-in-law had spun this huge lie, telling everyone that I had flaked at the last second. She fed the story to my parents before the wedding, which explained why they never questioned me. Everyone just assumed her version was true because, well, I was the family outcast. That's not all. Remember that $250 dress? I begged her for months to return it so I could at least get my money back. Every time, she gave me another excuse. It's in storage. My mom has it, but she's sick. We'll arrange a time soon. A year later, I still didn't have the dress. By the time she finally returned it, it was too late to get a refund. I couldn't even sell it for 25 bucks, so I ended up repurposing it into a Megara costume from Hercules for Halloween. At least the ridiculous purple color finally served some purpose. Years passed, and eventually it was time for my own wedding. We hosted it on 14 acres of family land, a week-long campout with 80 guests. It was magical. Champagne flowing, fairy lights strung through the trees, campfires burning late into the night, and dancing that went on until the early hours. My family and I had repaired most of our relationships by then, so I wanted the day to be filled with love, joy, and peace. But of course, my sister-in-law couldn't let that happen. The night of my wedding, while everyone else was celebrating, she went around whispering to anyone who would listen about how terrible I was for backing out of her wedding years before. She dragged up the old story, acting as if it had just happened yesterday, painting herself as the victim again. My daughter overheard her, my parents overheard her, even some of my close friends overheard her. People came up to me afterwards saying, "Do you know she spent the whole night trash-talking you?" I was furious. Not just because she was bad-mouthing me on my wedding day, but because she was still spinning the same lie years later, even though she knew the truth. I tried to keep calm. After all, I didn't want to start drama at my own celebration. But then I remembered something. Those old Facebook messages she had sent me were still saved. The proof of her lies had been sitting in my inbox this whole time. So I pulled out my phone, dug up the messages, and started passing them around to the people she had been talking to. Everyone got to read the receipts, the part where she told me not to come, the excuses about the dress, all of it. And suddenly, her narrative crumbled. For once, the truth spoke louder than her drama. I didn't even have to confront her directly. I didn't need to cause a scene or scream across the campfire. Just quietly handing people the evidence was enough. Eventually, word got back to her that I had exposed her, and she and my brother left early, clearly embarrassed. It was the first time I felt like I had actually shut her down. The best part? In the aftermath, my family started to realize just how toxic she had been all along. The next night, as we sat around the campfire, relatives apologized for believing her lies for so many years. My grandmother even told her flat out that she was no longer welcome in her home. For me, it was both vindicating and bittersweet. I had been right all along, but it took years for anyone else to see it. Since then, I've cut ties with her completely. She thrives on drama, and I'm not willing to keep feeding her opportunities. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I should have said something directly to her face that night, just to watch her reaction. But honestly, I don't regret handling it the way I did. Passing the receipts quietly was enough. She exposed herself by leaving an embarrassment, and that was all the closure I needed. That's where this story ends. Man, nothing hits harder than old receipts coming back at the perfect time. It's one thing to stand your ground in the moment, but it's another level when the truth has been sitting there all along, just waiting to be pulled out. What I love about this one is how simple the payoff was. No yelling, no blow up, just calmly letting her own words undo her lies. And honestly, seeing a whole family finally connect the dots after years must have felt like a quiet victory. This next story is about some tenants who were just trying to cook dinner when a stranger showed up at their door and acted like they didn't even exist. My roommate and I rent this house that used to be on the market, but the owner didn't get the offer he wanted. So after a while, he pulled the listing down. The house sat quietly for a bit, and eventually he rented it to us. By the time this story happened, we had been living there for about 3 months. Everything was normal. We had a good relationship with our landlord, the neighbors were friendly enough, and it was finally starting to feel like home. That evening, we were both in the kitchen cooking dinner. Music was playing in the background, the dog was weaving around our feet, hoping for scraps, and we were just chatting as we chopped vegetables and stirred pots. It felt like one of those comfortable, ordinary nights where nothing out of the ordinary should happen. Then the doorbell rang. I peeked through the window that overlooked the front gate and saw a woman standing there. My first thought was that it was just a delivery driver. We'd had a few problems with packages being left outside before, so I figured maybe they wanted us to sign for something or didn't feel safe leaving it by the gate. My roommate went to answer the door while I stayed in the kitchen, half listening through the music and the sound of our dog losing his mind at the sight of a stranger. At first, I couldn't make out much of what was being said, but then, over the barking, I heard the woman say something that made me pause mid-stir. "Can I come in and take a look at the backyard? I'd like to see what I'm working with." I froze. I looked at our guests, who were sitting at the dining table waiting for dinner, and they looked just as baffled. It was one of those moments where everyone silently agrees they must have misheard, because who in their right mind says something like that to people they don't know? My roommate, though, is an attorney, so I had no doubt she was going to handle it firmly and politely. The conversation that unfolded was surreal. The woman at the gate started explaining herself in this overly casual way, as if her request wasn't completely outrageous. She said, "I was working with your real estate agent, and I can't get a hold of him, so I just stopped by. I was wondering if I could come in and see what your backyard looks like and what the view is like." My roommate immediately shut that down. She told her, "No, the house isn't for sale anymore. It's off the market." But the woman wasn't deterred. She just kept pushing, saying, "I know, but the house is only being rented for a year, so I wanted to come in. Can I come in and look at your backyard?" At this point, my roommate's voice shifted from polite confusion to controlled disbelief. She told her, "I'm confused and don't understand who you are or what's going on. We live here." The woman just kept going, like she hadn't heard a word. "I want to come in so I can measure the backyard really quick and see how big it is." By then, I was practically gripping the kitchen counter in disbelief. Who just shows up to a stranger's house and asks to come inside with that kind of confidence? And not just inside, straight through to the backyard, as if we were invisible tenants standing in the way of her business. My roommate didn't budge. She said firmly, "No, now is definitely not a good time for that. You'll have to speak to the owner." And then came the part that made it even stranger. The woman tried to drop a name, but she got it wrong. She said, "Oh yeah, that's not owner's name, right?" My roommate corrected her immediately. "No, that's not the owner's name. Maybe that's the name of the real estate agent he was working with or something." That seemed to stump the woman for a moment. After a few more awkward lines back and forth, my roommate finally got her to leave. She closed the gate, came back into the kitchen, and just gave me this look. The kind of look that says, "Did that really just happen?" The whole room buzzed with disbelief for a few minutes after. My guests and I replayed what we'd overheard, half laughing and half nervous, because it honestly felt like something out of a creepy movie. We joked that we should expect to see her crawling around the side yard later, like some kind of HGTV cryptid trying to measure property lines in the moonlight. But the more I thought about it, the less funny it became. What really stuck with me was the way she acted like we weren't even people. To her, we weren't tenants who lived there full-time, paying rent and making it our home. We were placeholders, obstacles in her way, as she tried to chase down a commission or whatever real estate angle she was working. The house wasn't even on the market anymore, yet she felt entitled to walk in and treat it like she still had access. It wasn't just the audacity that got under my skin. It was the complete lack of awareness. The way she acted like asking to stroll into someone else's backyard while they were cooking dinner was the most natural thing in the world. Later that night, after the dog had calmed down and the dishes were washed, my roommate and I sat there and shook our heads. We both kept waiting for her to circle back, maybe lurking around the fence line or peering in from the side yard. But thankfully she never returned. Still, that strange sense of violation lingered, not in the dramatic sense of someone breaking in, but in the subtler way of being reminded how some people truly don't respect boundaries. Living in a rental has its quirks, sure, but I never thought dealing with rogue would-be buyers showing up unannounced would be on the list. That's the end of this story. What a wild thing to deal with in the middle of making dinner. Like, there's nosy, and then there's, "Let me measure your backyard real quick while you're living there." I can't get over the confidence it must take to even say that out loud. Honestly, the way the roommate handled it was perfect. Calm, firm, no room for arguments. And still, I'd probably be side-eyeing every window for a week after, just in case that lady decided to come back with a tape measure. This next story is about a hotel employee who spends every shift fighting off scammers, while guests complain about the very fraud prevention policies that keep the business alive. I work at a small hotel, and lately, fraud has been hitting us hard. It usually starts out looking completely normal. Someone books one of our highest rates, like a prepaid package deal where the full amount is charged up front. The payment goes through on a card, but then here's the trick. They call us, switch the card on file to their own, and cancel the reservation. We process the refund to their card, and a few weeks later, the real cardholder disputes the original charge. We lose the money every single time because the name on the reservation never matches the name of the actual cardholder. When I first learned how it worked, it made my stomach turn. It's so simple, but devastating. So now, we've put rules in place. If a canceled reservation has a different card than the one it was booked with, we deny the refund unless it goes back to the original card. If they no longer have access to that card, we tell them to file a dispute with their bank, and we'll accept it. It's really the safest way to protect ourselves. Most people who are legitimate understand once we explain it, but the scammers, they explode. They accuse us of calling them liars, or they scream at the front desk team like we're thieves. And honestly, the second they start yelling, my confidence in them drops to zero. It's such a dead giveaway. What people don't realize is how serious this is. Last year, before we started enforcing these rules, the hotel lost over $20,000 to fraud. $20,000. For a small hotel like ours, that's enough to put us under. Even now, if we slip up and lose $1,000 chargeback, it could cost me my job. Yet, so many guests act like their $150 is more important than us staying afloat. The worst part was earlier this year. A guest checked in, and when it came time for incidentals, they handed over a completely different card than the one used to pay for the booking. Our front desk agent didn't bother verifying the original card. No chip, no tap, nothing. He just let it slide. Later, the original cardholder filed a chargeback, and just like that, we lost $2,000. The only small relief was that the guest actually showed up, so we didn't end up refunding anything extra. But still, it stung. I think what frustrates me the most is the lack of empathy. People don't see the bigger picture. They don't see that if we don't do fraud prevention, our hotel bleeds money and jobs are on the line. Mine included. All they see is their refund being delayed, and they lash out like we're the villains. But the reality is, without these checks, there might not even be a hotel left to stay in. That's the end of this story. It blows my mind how many people don't understand fraud prevention. Like, if you're legit, it's not that complicated. A refund to the original card, or you go through your bank. But the minute someone starts raging about it, that's when you know they're probably trying to pull something. Honestly, the employee is right. It's a no-win situation. Guests scream either way, but without those policies, the hotel wouldn't even survive. Anyways, that's all the stories I have for today. Hopefully this was a chill listen, whether you followed along the whole time or just left it on in the background. But before you go, if you enjoyed the video, a quick like and subscribe really helps me out. And as always, thanks for hanging out, and I'll catch you in the next one.